Hi, Nate Crum here. This video is for Bob's family. Now, if you're not part of Bob's family, that's okay. You can still watch the video. This video is not the documentary. It's a part of it, or it will be a part of it, or parts of this will be a part of the documentary. What you're about to see here is all of the interviews that I filmed of all the members of Bob's family that I filmed from the Kaplowitz, Korde, Brawer family for my documentary. These are the full interviews in their entirety. Well, not really in their entirety. I cut some parts out here and there, some kind of dead space. Mostly me talking too much, which I feel like I'm doing right now. So this is not the documentary. It's just the interviews of the family. But I hope that you enjoy this. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Max. Uncle Bob, he was a great guy. He was always joyful. Always had a smile on his face. It was always great seeing him. Yeah.
Do you want me to go like in the shade somewhere, or like?
Let's do it over here, and then I can see the.
Yeah, we can start over here and then like.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Spencer Katz. Bob is my great uncle. Right now, I'm just at a pop-up event right now at a store that I opened about a month ago. It's called All Street. It's kind of an art gallery / clothing store where we kind of have a rotation of different brands and artists that do gallery events and clothing brand pop-ups, and we also work with a lot of different designers of different kinds and do live performances here as well, like comedy shows and stuff, kind of really anything here, but it's called All Street. I always enjoyed having him come visit New York and seeing him out in New Jersey for dinner, and one of my fondest memories of Bob is that he gave me this Mickey Mouse jersey, soccer jersey, when I was young for my birthday, and I remember I loved that shirt and I wore it like to sleep like every night and just had that shirt for a very long time and still have it somewhere in my place, and I just remember that shirt being very special, and yeah.
Sit right here.
Without my drink, right?
You can have your drink if you want.
Well,
But if you don't want it, whichever is fine by me.
I should be the drunken relative, right? You know what? I will have my drink.
Let me grab a chair. I'm going to steal one of these chairs.
I'm Larry Orloff, and I have lived in New Jersey since I graduated law school many years ago, but I met Bobby before that. So Bobby's mother, Ruth, was a niece of my mother. I felt closer to them than I did to other members of the family, maybe because they were just warmer people, Ruth and Jack. It turned out that I actually spent quite a bit of time with Bobby and with his brother Jerry, because when I went to law school in the summer between my first and second year of law school and my second and third year, I lived with them, Terhune Avenue, and I lived with Jack and Ruth and their two young boys, Jerry and Bobby, and I would commute to where I was clerking, which was in Fair Lawn, probably 20-25 minutes drive away. Life was very interesting and exciting in the household at that time. Obviously, with Bobby, there were issues because of his condition, but everybody, including particularly his mother and father, adjusted, I'm sure as best they could. I can't imagine they weren't upset about it, but they lived with it and they made best of it, and we really did have, I can't say I was an intimate member of the family, but I certainly was there, and I certainly was there a lot of times for dinner, because I was working nearby, and we had a good time, and the way they would deal with Bobby was to treat him as though he was just a member of the family and nothing was different. And even then, I could tell that Bobby, despite his physical difficulties, was very, very bright. I won't say he was brighter than his brother, because his brother's in the room as we're talking here. So we won't get into that. I could have felt like a boarder, but I really felt like a member of the family. And unfortunately, I think it was sometime during the second summer that, as I recall it, Bobby and Jerry's mother passed on. It certainly paid off in terms of what he made of his life. He made a lot more of his life than a lot of people without handicaps make of theirs. And well, I give a lot of the credit to his immediate family. I give the vast majority of the credit to Bobby.
My name is DeAnn Wilson Orloff. I'm married to one of Bobby's cousins, Larry Orloff. When I first came to meet the family, Larry told me that Bobby's brother had pretty extreme cerebral palsy, and that it was kind of difficult to talk to him. And I said, well, I'll give it a try. I speak a bunch of languages, so I thought maybe I'd be able to kind of get it. I really couldn't the first time I met Bobby, but fortunately his caregivers were there and they were translating for me what he was saying. He understood what I was saying, but so I found him charming, Bobby. And when I got home, Nancy sent me the book, Don't Ignore My Mind. I read it and I thought, he and I have similar interests. He's traveled all over the world. I love to travel. He loves opera. I love opera. He's been to many of the grand opera houses in Europe, and so have I. And I thought, I can get this. If those caregivers can get it, I'm going to be able to get it. So the next time I came to visit with the family, I went over to Bobby and I said, Bobby, I'm DeAnn. I hope you remember me. And he did. As always, his big smile on his face. And I said, I'd like to be able to talk to you. And if we just exchange words for a while, I'll be able to get the cadence in your voice, and then we can have like a real conversation. He's going, yeah. And I'm sure the caregivers were thrilled. They weren't going to have to translate everything he said. So we started talking, and I told him that I had read the book, and I was intrigued because I knew that he had visited Italy and heard opera. And I told him that I had gone to school in Italy during my sophomore year of college. I went to Stanford's campus in Florence, their opera house, went up to La Scala, heard a wonderful performance there. And I asked him to tell me about where he'd been in Europe and what he had done. And his caregiver started translating, and I said, guys, I think I'm going to be able to get little bit by little bit. So they said, okay, he understands what you say, and when you don't understand, he's going to know that you don't understand what he says, and he'll repeat it. So we went back and forth for about 5 minutes, and then this marvelous thing happened. I could understand him, and we could exchange views and have a real conversation. And I thought, this is just an amazing life experience, because you want to expose yourself to all kinds of things. And here I am talking to this gentleman who was born with extreme disabilities and whose stepmother and family worked with him and sent him to schools, and he's confined to a wheelchair and really not in control of all of his movements. And we're able to talk about opera at La Scala. And I thought, how marvelous it is that despite his, I don't want to call it a disability, despite his capacities being minimal to ours, he went to college, he got degrees, he traveled, and I'm worried about what I look like if I don't have lipstick on. He was not worried. He lived life, and every time I met him after that, we just had a great conversation. I just grew to be so fond of him. Loved it. Loved it.
My name's Susan Provisor Hugawell. So my father, Benjamin Provisor, and his oldest brother was, what's his name? the oldest brother was Bobby's grandfather, Meyer. There was Meyer, there were 6 girls, and then my father. So there was quite an age difference. So I guess, so then Bobby's mother Ruth, who was Meyer's daughter, so I guess Bobby was my second cousin, right? So we were the same age. He was born in 1948. May, I understand, I didn't remember. And I was born March 1948. And what I remember about Bobby, it's not that much because when I was young, we used to very often go visit his parents on the Sunday. Sunday was the day to visit the family. We go over in the evening, and I remember going to Bobby's room, and because he was usually always in his room, and somehow I remember him sitting in a special desk or a chair or something. And I always remember him having some kind of music. And I do remember that he liked opera. So whether he was playing opera or playing other, type of classical music, that's what I remember. So I'd usually go into his room for a little bit. I don't know, I don't remember trying to communicate with him necessarily. I was young and he was young. I don't remember how old I was. I'm guessing maybe I was 8 or 9. I mean, probably we went to visit, but my memory is probably the latest then. And I do remember his mother, Ruthie, sometimes bringing him out and carrying him. And he was heavy. She carried him out and either brought him probably in the living room where a lot of the family was. I remember that. We used to go there and watch. They had a den, and it was always the Ed Sullivan show was on, and everybody would gather in the Ed Sullivan, to watch it. So maybe that's when she brought him out. And that's pretty much all I remember.
Great.
I didn't see him when I got older. I never went to Indiana to visit him there, and unfortunately, that's all I know.
Okay, well, I'm Nan Hoffman. I'm Bob's, my maiden name is Provisor. Okay, so Bob's mother was my father's niece. So that makes Bob's mother and I first cousins.
Right.
But I was a little pipsqueak. I was like 7, my early memories of Bob. His mother was obviously much older than me, but that's because my father came from a group of 10 children. So, yes, Bob's mother would be my first cousin, but she was much older than me. So that would make Bob and I something like first cousins once removed or second cousins. I guess it doesn't really matter. Anyway, my earliest memories of Bob. So I'll give childhood memories. Bob lived around the block from me. I lived on a street called Amsterdam Avenue, and if you just went around the corner, you hit Terhune Avenue, and that's where Bob and his family lived. And as a kid, I used to like to take my bike and ride around to Bob's house, and we would visit Bob. And what I liked, this is from like a 7-year-old's point of view, I thought it was so cool that he had all this equipment. He had a wheelchair, and I think he had braces, and I just was, I was fascinated by all of this. And so I just like checking all this stuff out. And his mother was the sweetest woman on earth, as his father. Well, did you ever get, Jack died not that long ago.
I met him twice, yeah.
Okay, he's the most positive person on earth. I mean, just incredible. And, when I think, now that I have children of my own, and I think of all that, they had to contend with, and it was Jack's incredible, positive attitude, as was his mother. Ruthie was wonderful. They were great. And so I liked going over there just for the vibe of the household. It was really lovely. And then I guess Bob's parents got him a dog. I don't know if you heard anything about the Boston Terrier, Lulu Bell. And I love dogs. I'm passionate about dogs. But my parents, they were too busy worrying about a clean house or whatever, so they wouldn't let me have a dog. So that was another reason I liked visiting Bob, because not only did he have all this cool equipment, but he had this great little dog. And I loved going over there and playing with Lulu Bell and him. And it was just, that's my earliest memory of him is just, he was my cousin around the corner. And no, he couldn't come out and play with us the way we did, but I really enjoyed going over there. Then, later on, we all grew up and went to college and what have you. And then we really didn't see much of each other until Ron and I moved to Indianapolis in, it was 82, I guess. And Bob was out there in Indiana. I guess he was in Bloomington at that. So we would occasionally go and visit him. And, his knowledge of opera was amazing. I don't know that we went to, I know that the IU's operas were unbelievable. And we saw them. I can't remember if we saw them with Bob or not. I don't know. But we would just, we were in Indianapolis. He was in Bloomington. So we would see each other on occasion. Probably not enough, but he was so impressive. Just again, this incredible positive attitude. Probably because of the help of guys like you. I mean, that's just amazing that you were all able to work as a team and help him out. And it was wonderful for him, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful thing to observe. So I'm just trying. So that's pretty much what I can tell you.
How much older are you than Bob? How much older are you than Bob?
Oh, not that much. Right now I'm 76.
Okay, he would have been 74.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I was just 2 years older than him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything about Ruth or Jack or Jerry?
I mean, I just remember Ruth and Jack just wonderful to be around. They were just wonderful, wonderful to be around. I'm probably revealing too much. The household I was living in was not positive. it was tense as hell. It was, you know, it was a tough atmosphere where I lived. You know, it was just different personalities. You know, my father was sort of hot-tempered. My mother she was okay, but you know, they hardly oozed with positivity. They were, you know, I don't know what, you know, a lot of, I don't know what the word is. They were just sort of, I don't know, they would get burdened by everyday life wasn't as easy for them. Here's what the ironic thing is: everyday life seemed easier for Ruth and Jack and their family. I mean, I'm just talking about a child's impression now. I mean, it had to be very difficult. But their attitudes were so excellent that I liked being around them. They were great to be around. And then, of course, it was tragic that Ruth died so suddenly and quickly of leukemia. I mean, nowadays she would have had a fighting chance, but she didn't. It was in the 50s. I think it was in the 50s. So I just liked being around them a lot. I don't know what else I can add, but that's a childhood memory. That's a strong one. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Awesome.
You're welcome.
Thank you
Okay.
very
I
much.
hope it works out.
That's great.
Bob must have told you. My father was a doctor,
You want to say who
doctor
you are?
provisor.
Who are you?
I'm Louise. Am I on here?
Yeah, you're on. Yeah. Tell me who you are.
Okay, I'm Louise Kleinbaum. What's my Jerry? Bob's. Then I guess I'm second cousin to. Yes, Bob's mother Ruthie was my first cousin, and unfortunately she died young, which was sad. I didn't really see Bob much in his later years, other than when he came here to see Jerry and Nancy, and then she'd invite us all down, and most of the time we came to see how he was doing. But my early memories, when I was a kid, and I mean like really young, 10 years or younger, my family always went out for dinner on Sunday night. That was a family ritual. And afterwards, if we were in New York City, we went to visit my grandparents. If we were in Passaic, and I grew up in Passaic, we would go over to the Kaplawitzes. And like you mentioned before, I really hadn't had much exposure as a young child to anybody who was handicapped. And I guess maybe initially it was a little scary or disconcerting, you're trying to sort this out. And any experience I did have, most people who were handicapped tended to be was almost more of an intellectual deficit as opposed to a physical deficit. But I was so impressed with Bobby because he understood everything. He might be spastic, he might have his problems, his speech might be awkward, but when there was a conversation going on, like tonight at dinner or whatever, he knew what was going on. He comprehended it, he knew the situation, and he usually had something, had some input, something to say about something. And as you said, he had a sense of humor too, and that was really eye-opening to me because it wasn't something that I expected. I didn't realize that his brain was functioning, and not just normally, but maybe in overdrive. So I was really pleased that later on he was able to have an education, that Charlotte really went out there and, pioneered and looked for a place that would be right for him, and that he became so passionate about music, was able to go to the opera and really enjoyed that. The other thing that impressed me in those early years was when we went there, how you never got the feeling that this family felt that Bobby was burdened. That, as Jerry just said, he was part of the family, he was there, it was what it was, and they really enjoyed this child. They did everything to maximize his skills, both physically and intellectually, but they just liked having him around. And it wasn't like, oh, let's hurry up and get him to bed so we can enjoy ourselves. I mean, he was part of the family, and he participated like any normal child. And I think that left a big impression on me, having never been exposed to anyone with that type of handicap. I think that's all I have to say. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, my name is Ron Hoffman. I'm the husband of one of Bobby's cousins. Her maiden name was Nan Provisor. She's Nan Hoffman now. So I knew Bobby really from the 1980s when we moved to Indianapolis, and Bobby was obviously living in Bloomington at that time, and then we also, after that, moved to Chicago. So we would see him periodically in Bloomington, and then when we lived in Chicago, and then subsequently moved back to New York, we'd see him when he'd come with his crew to either the opera in Chicago or in New York. And I found him quite a remarkable person. I had really never met anybody like him. He was obviously greatly impaired by a cerebral palsy, but initially I just thought it was really amazing, the inner spirit and the inner happiness that he had, that I thought was really remarkable, that I'm not sure I would have the intellectual ability to cope with those kinds of disabilities. I really thought he was a remarkable person. I also thought a lot of people would just give up, and he never gave up. And his interest in opera, I thought, was really a way to funnel this very positive energy that he had. I thought he had an enormous amount of positive energy. And I thought it was really, I really respected his belief, his true religiosity. I thought he found a lot of strength in that, and the community that he surrounded himself with, I thought was really very remarkable. I didn't know a lot of people like that, so I always enjoyed meeting the people that worked with him, and it was always a rotating crew, so I met, we didn't see him very often. I don't want to give that impression that we saw him, on a very frequent basis, but it was always a different crew, and their kindness and understanding of this person and their respect for him, I thought was really amazing. And it's sort of, I'm Jewish, but it's sort of really was emblematic of my understanding of what the Christian faith really truly represented. And it was really sort of taking somebody who was in great need, and these people gave of themselves in order to do that. And I was very impressed by that. And I thought he brought out the best in those people. And they learned a lot from him, from his struggles. So it was a pleasure to really know him. I was sorry that he passed, but I thought even though he started with this incredible disability, he really had a full life. He had so many friends and so many experiences that many people just never had. Even people that don't have those disabilities that weren't able to travel. Obviously, he had the opportunity, he had the unusual situation where he had the financial resources to do that. But many people with financial resources just would have thrown up their hands and not done anything and just sat around and developed, skin ulcers and died. And he didn't do that. He just kept on fighting and kept on growing. He was always in evolution and had this positive energy force that I really thought was quite remarkable. So I thought he was an amazing person.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I thought he was amazing, really. I never met anybody like him. Probably never will.
Well, the deli's great. We've been here for over 60 years. great pastrami, corned beef, great smells. I think that was the reason a lot of people come in, for the smell and the comfort food. So there's a couple things. The smell of the Jewish deli is a little different than the Italian deli smell. When you go in there, it smells like the cheeses. Here it smells like the meats, which is the pastrami and corned beef have a very unique smell, which I find to be the best. And that's into the Jewish soul. So yeah, Bob loved it here, and his old waitress during the pandemic's not here anymore. Her name was Marbette, and I'm sure she would love to have seen him. So we all miss you, Bob. Bob, I hope you're smelling the great Jewish deli smell in heaven.
Joyce Kaplowitz, and I was married to Bob Kaplowitz's father. We were together 21 years. We were married almost 19 years. And Bob was a very big part of our life because Jack was very, very close to Bob, and I loved him. He used to send me Mother's Day cards. He missed his mother, and he felt that I was taking his mother's place, and we had a wonderful relationship. I loved seeing him. We always had a lot to talk about, and as the years went on, it was difficult to talk to him, but the boys always translated whatever he said. Always enjoyed being with him. He was always up, and he was always full of wonderful things to say. Never forgot my birthday. Always wonderful Mother's Day cards, and he was very dear to me. Yes, when he found out Jack always talked about it, he found out when he was 6 months old, because as babies are at least 6 months old, they can hold their heads up. And that's when Jack found out that he had this terrible, terrible disease. And they handled it in the best way they could. His mother was wonderful. I think she was the guiding light for him. And she instilled that wonderful love for music, which really made him what he was. He loved music. He loved the opera, and I think it was very important to him. Sometimes I would call, and he'd be watching the opera, and I couldn't talk to him. He'd call me back because I couldn't speak to him then. But I think she was a very big influence in his life and devoted herself to him. And she must have been a wonderful person, wonderful, wonderful mother. Also to Jerry, too, and it was very difficult for his brother to have a handicapped son like that. Jerry always handled it very, very well. And Jack always enjoyed his visits when he came to Florida. We loved being with him. We took him out, and he loved sitting at our pool in the backyard, and Jack was always very sad when he left. And we all miss him. Yeah, because I think he was an inspiration for all of us. Well, I'll tell you something very funny. My memory isn't so wonderful. There were a lot of funny things and a lot of good times that we had together. It was always very inspirational for me to be with him, and I always felt good when we did see him. But I really cannot remember any incidents, I have to tell you the truth, that stand out in my mind. He was always, he was strong, and I think that's what kept him alive, because most people with cerebral palsy live to 40, 45 years old. He lived to his 70s, and it's amazing that he lived that long. But I think he had wonderful care. He loved what he was doing. He loved being at the house with the boys. The boys were, all the boys, we loved having the boys. He would come with 2 boys, and it was always fun. And I can only say wonderful things about Bob. I loved him. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Whoever's around, like any family. So you invited David, and he had.
Is that when all the cousins came?
No, this was before. That was Mother's Day, and our birthday. It was the same day. So David Gerstein was alive. So it was before 2001.
Yeah.
And I remember Judy couldn't go because she had something for work. But David came and had a great time. And it was like probably the Weinbergers were there. Whoever was around came. And you just said, everyone bring family. So this
We don't
was
remember which
probably-
birthday that was.
I was thinking 50th. It was
birthday? Our birthday?
no, Uncle Bob's birthday.
Well, that would be our birthday.
No, but it was for his birthday, not our
Oh,
birthday.
for like his 60
Yeah.
something ish birthday?
Well, if I was dating, yeah.
How do you remember that?
Because that's
No
the picture,
recollection.
and I remember David Gerstein being in, like, Mommy just invited family.
Did we have it here?
No, at their house. That's their
Yeah,
kitchen.
house. Oh, so what did we
And
have
Judy
in-
was
when we
away,
were
but
in
David came.
Indiana? Oh my
That
God,
was
I don't
another
remember
birthday.
all that.
Oh yeah, where are all those pictures? I'm Cindy Gerstein, Uncle Bob's niece. I am 52 years old, and I live in Short Hills, New Jersey. I have a husband named Brian and 2 girls, Haley and Sophie. Haley's 22, Sophie is 18. And I have the same birthday as Uncle Bob, May 8th. Alison does too.
Yes.
We're
We're triplets. I'm Alison Comito, also Uncle Bob's niece, and I am also 52 years old, and I live in Short Hills, New Jersey, and I'm married to David Comito, and we have 3 children. Sammy, or Samantha, but we call her Sammy, is 22. Max is 20, and Matthew is 16. And yes, we have the same birthday as Uncle Bob, and Cindy and I are triplets along with our brother Scott. So it's unusual that we're triplets. It's even more unusual that we were born on the same day as Uncle Bob, which was always a nice connection.
Birthday buddies.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So
We
that
always sent
was-
each other cards, and Uncle Bob would always sign his card with BK that he wrote out, which was always nice.
Yes. Was it BK or RK?
No, Bob.
Yeah,
B.
Robert.
No, I think he called himself Bob.
I know, but I
Yeah.
don't know. Was it?
I'm trying to remember what it was.
Was it RK? or
Maybe
BK?
sometimes it was
It
B,
could-
and maybe
yeah,
sometimes it was
could've-
R. Either way, he wrote it out.
Yes, he always
Mm-hmm.
signed the cards with initials. They were holiday cards, whether they were holiday cards or birthday cards, and we sent him birthday cards as well. I also remember at one point sending him popcorn from my favorite popcorn place because I always loved popcorn. He loved popcorn. And then after I think a few years of sending him popcorn, I don't know if it was Uncle Bob or if it was my mom who said, okay, you have to stop sending him popcorn because he can't eat popcorn anymore.
I
So
didn't know that.
that ended that.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I went to Indiana in December, the beginning of December, with Sophie and Brian. She was considering going to school there, so we needed to go see it, which meant going to see Uncle Bob, which was good. We were looking forward to doing that because we hadn't seen him. We had a really nice visit with him, spent 2-3 hours with Uncle Bob and the boys. Sophie was very overwhelmed with his room and the walls lined with all the CDs. It was like nothing you've ever seen. But it was really nice spending time with him, and our timing was, we got lucky. So I'm glad we were able to do that. And then I guess right before Uncle Bob passed away, he had COVID. I had COVID at the same time. So, we both have COVID. I called, how are you feeling? What's going on? So we traded some stories and spoke to him. And then I think he passed away like the next day or 2 later. So again, timing is everything. So I'm glad I got that in also.
But I also had a visit a few years ago when I took my daughter, Sammy. Actually, our whole family wound up going to see Indiana, IU, and Uncle Bob. But
Actually, Brian, my husband, and Haley joined. Was that the trip?
yes, that
Yeah,
was the
'cause
trip.
those girls who just graduated were also looking at Indiana.
So they were looking at Indiana. Looking at Indiana, of course, meant going to see Uncle Bob, too. You can't go to Bloomington and not see Uncle Bob. So that was nice because my whole family, Cindy's family, got to see where Uncle Bob lived. They did, he always came to us. So they had never seen where he lived, what the home looked like, and how he lived. So it was really nice for them to get that experience and really get more of an understanding of his life and his life at Indiana. So that was great that we were able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that was incredible
Mm-hmm.
to see all the people who worked with him and had relationships with him. And I feel like
Yeah.
once he had a relationship with someone, it lasted forever. He made such an impact on their lives. I mean, it was just amazing to see.
Everybody loved him.
Yeah.
He had so many
Uh-huh.
friends.
I think it was his sense of humor, which he definitely got from my grandfather.
For sure.
My grandfather was silly, always laughing, he was a big flirt. And Uncle Bob has that way too about him. Always smiling. It was nice to see.
Bloody.
My mom always liked to celebrate, especially Uncle Bob's occasions, big birthdays, getting all the family together.
Yeah, and then
So-
there was that birthday that you said was
Yes.
at our house.
Mm-hmm.
This picture.
Right, that was probably
The three of us happened to have been in this picture.
Yes. That was probably
But we
about-
celebrated in New Jersey.
Yeah, that
Uncle
was
Bob came
probably
to
over
us.
20 years ago. And that was at my parents' house. So if that was probably his 50th, maybe.
Hmm.
Yeah. Maybe. We could figure it out if we really tried.
You would, I can't.
I was just always so impressed. Are we filming?
We're filming.
Okay. With his zest for life. I mean, nothing seemed to stop him. I mean, he was in this wheelchair and he just traveled all over. I mean, he's been to his life seems so much more exciting than mine, actually. He was just so lucky that he had, he was able to do that. And I was
Traveled
just
to Europe.
He traveled all over Europe.
Traveled to, and even the United States. Went
Yes.
to Chicago. Went
Uh-huh.
to Florida. New York, obviously, New Jersey. And when he was in New York, he always went to the opera. I mean, he always visited us in New Jersey, and
we would work around
always
his
went to
schedule.
the opera, not just once,
Mm-hmm.
probably at least two,
Yeah.
if not
Uh-huh.
three
Broadway
times.
shows.
Oh, yes, always. I mean, amazing, and the city is a crazy place to be, as anyone
Mm-hmm.
who's been there before, and especially, I mean, he just knows the city. He grew up going to the city, and he just continued to go to the city for so many years.
And he would
so-
have these boys who probably had never driven in Manhattan.
and it's like, woof, eye-opening, but he would make them do it.
Yep.
he would
We're-
do anything to get to his opera.
And then in between city trips, we would meet him for dinner
Uh-huh.
at Epicessin.
Yes.
Um,
His favorite place.
yes, Starlight. The waitress and Uncle Bob had the sweetest relationship.
At
They had like a
Epicessin.
little thing going back and forth, like flirting thing. It was very sweet. And they were even talking about her. I can't remember her name. But one of the waitresses, do you remember her name? But they were saying how my last visit that they should bring her so she could be one of the Bobites and take
Yeah.
care of him. And she probably would have.
She probably would.
She loved him. It was fun to
Yes.
see.
Yes.
Um,
And it was always fun going to Epicessin with him. And, unfortunately, towards the end of his life, he couldn't eat, but he still wanted to go to Epicessin and I guess watch us eat and let whoever was
well,
with
his friends,
him, his friends, experience his love of Jewish deli. And I guess just being with us, we have this huge round table with all of us, or as many of us that we can. As everybody gets older, everyone's goes in different directions, but as many of us that we can scrounge up that day and get to come to dinner, we always did that. That was always fun, and then the kids could catch up with Uncle Bob, and talk about their day or what's going on, or just discuss whatever it may be.
And then if he came for Thanksgiving, I remember one time he came, my mother-in-law was hosting Thanksgiving. My parents were probably somewhere else with my mom's side. Everyone kind of separated. And on Thursday, he came to my mother-in-law's, welcomed him, and he joined us for Thanksgiving, and it was really nice. And I think he went to Alison's one year when she hosted.
Yes, he was always coming to our houses after we got married, and we had kids, and he always came for holidays, for dinner, for lunch. Whenever he was in town, he would always
If we weren't at
come
Epicessin.
over. If we weren't at Epicessin, we would host him at our house, and he would just hang out there. And
He would
just
probably come
spend
definitely
the afternoon
2 times a year, usually around Christmas or Thanksgiving. And then in May,
Summer.
maybe sometimes, the end of the summer,
Mhm.
and that would be the 3rd. And we always made it a point to make sure we were around to be with him and talk to the
Yes.
guys who ever he had with him.
Yes.
And it was just amazing. Part of me, I think back, like the saying, it takes a village. Everyone in Indiana who helped out, between the church, the boys who lived in the house. I mean, they were able to allow Bob to do everything that he was able to do that we're talking about. And then the New Jersey people, my grandfather who started the house, the whole setup. My dad continued it, and then Scott took over dealing with everything. I would tell my friends, oh, my uncle, he lives in Indiana. He's severely handicapped, but he just manages to live life to his fullest. And he has this whole setup where these boys come in and live there. And people are just like, oh my God, keep going. I want to hear more. It's fascinating. And it's a very unusual scenario, which was incredible for the people in New Jersey who helped him, knowing that he was so well taken care of in Indiana.
Right. Yeah.
And
was
in
able
such
to
good
live
hands.
so independently.
Mhm.
Yeah. It was nice to know.
Yeah.
There was a whole team out in Indiana, and when one team left, there was a whole other team that came in and took over, and Uncle Bob really knew how to run it.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
He was in charge. He was the boss. I mean,
Yeah.
you wouldn't think, but yeah, he was fully in charge, and he put you in your place, from what I understand. If you were messing up, maybe he had to fire a few people, but he was in charge. And if he wanted to give you a hard time, he would. That's where a sense of humor came in. So
yes.
Keep going.
He did love animals. Remember, he had a dog. I do remember way back when I was growing up and we had a cat, Uncle Bob would come, and I think, I'm almost positive this is right, that he just loved to come.
I think you're right.
See the
Yes.
cat. His name was Mohegan. The cat was my favorite also, but Uncle Bob enjoyed petting him and seeing him, and then he got a dog at some point, so that was nice. He did like to be around the animals, but I do specifically remember he enjoyed seeing the cat. Yeah, that was fun.
I remember he pretty much made it. I don't know. I want to say he didn't make it to my wedding, but there were 3 other weddings in the family right around the same time. So mine was last. I want to say he was coming a little bit later because mine was in the beginning of November. So, but he did go to everybody else's. And I just remember a fond memory I have of him was dancing with him on the dance floor with Alison, Tracy, and we were all holding hands, pushing his wheelchair, and he just had the biggest smile on his face, and it was really a nice memory.
When he came to our house for lunch or dinner, whatever it was, there was probably always a sporting event on. And, he was not into sports, but he would still sit there and hang out with everyone anyway. My family's very big into sports, so there was always some sort of game on, probably a Michigan game, whether it was Michigan football and we would always say, Uncle Bob, you're not into sports. but you're still watching anyway, or whoever was with him. They might be into sports. Some of the friends were into sports for sure, so they enjoyed watching whatever game it was, football, basketball, whatever it may have been. But yeah, no, Uncle Bob had no interest in the sports, but yet he still just hung out with us and just was with us and enjoyed being with us, and yeah, so that was always nice.
Yeah, he did not like sports.
No.
No time for sports. Too much opera.
No. Yes.
Too much opera.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, and maybe their dad wasn't. Our grandfather.
No, I don't think he really was, because we would have known. You know,
he was also a tennis player.
He was.
And
I guess their
fishing.
sports were more like golf and tennis, swimming, because they all like you know, to swim. And I mean, Grandpa rode his bike, so that type. But organized sports in terms of watching football or baseball, neither Dad nor Uncle Bob nor Grandpa, I don't think they were ever watching that. No.
But that was him with everything, it seemed like.
Right. He just appreciated life.
Come and gone.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
they would've been gone.
they were drawn to his personality. He was pleasant to
Yeah.
be around, silly.
Yeah. He just
And
made the most of everything, the most of life, which was nice.
And there seem to be so many who feel the same way you do. Smart, interested, happy,
Witty,
silly,
sarcastic.
uh-huh.
You know, he was this guy in a wheelchair, but as the book says, he has this extraordinary mind. So he's in a wheelchair. It's hard for him to talk, at least later on. I mean, it was always hard for him to talk and understand him. But early on, if you sat there and you listened and you made him repeat himself a few times, you could get what he was saying and have a conversation with him. So this incredible person, an incredible person who, yes, he's in a wheelchair, and yes, he can't feed himself, but his mind he's with it, and I would say that to my kids. He understands what you're saying and he can talk to you. It's just you have to be patient. You have to take the time to listen and have the conversation with him. But yeah, just an extraordinary person in every way, really, I would say. Not what you'd expect when you look at him, for sure. Well, because he's confined to a wheelchair, and yeah, he moves different ways and he can't always control himself, but he can control his mind and he can have a conversation, and you wouldn't expect that when you just see him. And yeah, he doesn't look like just any person who can walk or talk like us. He had so much more difficulty doing it, but yet he can. And yeah, and he has a great mind, and yeah.
And most of your interactions were with family.
Exactly.
Right.
I was gonna say the kids would come. They saw Uncle Bob from when they were really young, and they saw how we acted with him. So
you're not
they were very comfortable.
Right, you're not afraid
And
to go
they
over.
always hugged and kissed him. They didn't really care if they got hit a little bit, because we didn't. So we were always with family, and
But
his
people
friends
for
who
sure
came.
would look, if you were at a restaurant, would, look.
Right. But I wasn't focused on them so much, I guess.
No.
It was, and we went to the same places over and over again. Starlight, definitely, and Epicestin, obviously. And then Scott would have his places that he would take him to when we weren't there. And I feel like he was a creature of habit, obviously. And we would go to places that were easy to get around. So, yeah, I don't really remember anyone acting that way.
It's really, don't judge a book by its cover, is what it comes down to. Get to know someone.
Yeah, he's extremely well-rounded and,
Intelligent.
like I said,
and
traveled way more than I have. Yes, I remember. Were you at dinner with us one time? We were meeting my grandfather. it was just my grandfather and Uncle Bob. And I know it was me, Tracy, and my grandfather found a spot in the city to park the van. He was about to pull in, and some car pulls in right in front of him. And Tracy and I were livid. And we were not letting him get away with this. Do you remember?
No, maybe I
Oh.
wasn't there. I don't know.
So-
I would remember something like that.
My grandfather's about to pull in. He can't pull in because this guy in a fancy car pulls in, has an MD plate, so we know he's a doctor. And we bang on the door like, you pull out of this spot now. Our grandfather, who has our handicapped uncle in the car, was about to pull in, and you can't park here. Pull out. And he got out of the car and was ignoring us. I'm like, look, he really is in a handicapped van. You cannot take the spot. He was about to pull in. And we shamed him. He got back in his car and he pulled out. And I remember my grandfather telling my dad what had happened, and he said the girls handled it. Didn't have to do anything. The fact that he was brave enough to take these boys
Who've
from the
never been
Midwest
to the city.
and have them drive through the city.
I mean, driving in the city, walking in the city is one thing. Driving in the city is a whole other crazy ballgame.
I'm Tracy Katz. I am Bob's oldest niece. I'm 55 now. Bob has always been a significant part of my life growing up. I feel like he was always at our house with my grandfather. Sunday breakfasts were a very big deal in our house with bagels, and whenever Bob was in town, he'd be there. And I'm 3.5 years older than my sisters and brothers, so when I graduated college, I spent a lot of time with my grandfather in the city. He would come in and have dinner with me all the time when nobody else was around, and Bob was always there with us, having dinner with us in the city as well. My grandfather was great about bringing Bob everywhere. And he didn't, when Bob was younger, he didn't always need help the way he did. And I guess my grandfather was younger and Bob was younger. It would just be like the three of us a lot. And that was nice. That was a huge part of my growing up, my childhood. And it was just normal to have him around. And
When would that have been?
I graduated college in '89, and I moved pretty much into Manhattan just a few months after I graduated, and lived with a girlfriend and another girlfriend. But my grandfather, it was pre-Joyce, after Charlotte, so I spent a lot of time with him. The triplets were all still in college, so I spent a lot of time with him. Mostly he would come in, later in the day, and we'd have dinner. My grandfather was very into photography, so we'd go to the IPC, the International Photography Center, together and walk around and do things like that. So when Bob was in town, he would always be there with us as well. I think the two of them together, both being younger, my grandfather, when I was 20, I don't know what the age difference is. I need some math assistance. That's not my strong suit. But, my grandfather was probably like in his 70s then. So he was substantially younger. So he was able to get Bob in and out of a car. My grandfather would drive into the city with him, and, he could get him in and out of the wheelchair by himself. And Bob was a lot easier to handle. He was obviously still in his wheelchair, but, as he got older, things started to deteriorate more, and so it was harder. Yes. And then, like, Bob and my grandfather would just come. I mean, later on, things like the caregiver would come, But early on, they wouldn't come. But yes, Bob would always have a caregiver with him because he needed to get from Indiana to here. So, yes.
Yeah, that's just really interesting.
Yeah.
You know,
But there was also
it was very recent when I worked with Bob.
Right,
When I
right,
worked with Bob,
right.
there had to be at least 2 guys.
Right, like this was,
and we had to bring him
this
in.
was like 1990.
Right, yeah,
This was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Well, but that's
Yeah.
great. I mean, it's like,
Also remember, years ago, Bob used to fly. I mean, obviously he couldn't fly by himself, but no, he never came to New Jersey alone. But we would do things alone.
would he fly to New Jersey from Indiana?
That I don't remember. I almost want to say yes, but I could be wrong. My dad could probably tell you that.
Yeah.
I feel like the whole driving thing, when I say more recently, like, I just feel like it wasn't in 1980 or 89. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I could be completely wrong. It could be something that I just forgot.
Love opera.
I don't love opera, but I feel like I may have been once, but because I can visualize being in a theater with him with a wheelchair, but I don't know, maybe we were just picking up tickets or walking around. I'm not an opera person at all. If I had gone with him, I probably embarrassingly would have slept through the whole thing. I know I've been to like Lincoln Center with him. I can't remember. I want to say no. I feel like I might have just been there and we might have been buying tickets and picking up tickets and walking around. But I could sort of visualize being there with, like, in a theater with him though. But a long, long time ago. You know, I remember, like, when I was growing up, when I was in, like, middle school or whatever, and I had friends coming over and I knew that Bob was going to be there, I would say, you know, my uncle's going to be there, he's in a wheelchair, and I don't know why I felt like I needed to tell people, but I always remember telling them, and I remember nobody cared, you know, like, it was so not a big deal. He was just a normal family member. Nobody didn't bother, nobody stared, nobody noticed, you know, he was just Uncle Bob that everybody knew. Well, he would usually come here with whoever because he would be in the city, so then he'd do whatever museum and then we'd usually have dinner here, and he would just like to hang out and, you know, see my kids and my dog. My dog would like to sit on his lap, and my kids would, you know, talk to him, and he would sit at the table and listen to all of the nonsense of 2 boys, 2.5 years apart, you know, was always loud and wild here.
All the people around the table.
There's a very loud, like, dry humor that Bob had that's, I think, an East Coast Jewish thing. Even though he didn't think he was Jewish, something you can't get rid of.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Great.
His humor was my grandfather's, his dad's humor.
Oh.
For sure, 100%. More so than my dad. Like, I don't think my dad has my grandfather's humor as much as my uncle did. No, I just, you know, he was a big presence. He, you know, he was always happy. It was always great to see him and to hear about his travels when he was younger, before he couldn't travel anymore. But, you know, there was always some crazy story about them driving from Indiana to here. Even in the later years, there always seemed to be some sort of something happening and whatever. So, and all the guys always seemed to be great. And it's amazing that he got to live the way he did for as long, you know, and live the life that he did and for how long he did. And I think he probably lived as long as he did because he just had the care from everybody, you guys especially, in Bloomington. And, you know, it was just a great life and kept him going. You know, he wasn't just sitting, staring at a wall. He was really living life as much as he could. Well, 100% my grandfather figuring out that setup, which was incredible. You know, when I would try to explain to people, I have this uncle and, you know, he's living in this house, people, like, you know, it's hard to explain. But then it's you guys were so generous and kind and such good caretakers that, you know, you enabled it, which was amazing. Not many people can take care of somebody like that. It's amazing. I mean, you guys need to have a lot of patience, you know, especially the older he got, the harder it was to understand him talk. But you guys always knew what he wanted and needed, which to me is amazing. So most of the credit goes to you guys. Once the setup was in motion, you know, that's a great.
Yeah, so I'm Russell Katz. My mom is Tracy, Bob's niece, so Bob is my great uncle. Don't really have like one specific memory in mind, but just always, whenever we saw him, it was always a lot of fun, a lot of happiness and laughter, whether it was him stopping by when he was visiting the opera or family event in New Jersey, and just, you know, being able to talk to him and his helpers and just catching up. It's always just a good time, definitely like laid back, relaxed, and just a lot of laughs and a lot of joy. It's hard to pick one in particular, but I feel like that's the thing. Whenever he came by, whenever I saw him, it was always just a lot of laughter, a lot of joy, and just like a lot of good times and like smiles. Not really anything like worrisome, just a lot of laughter and joy. Yeah, I mean, just like looking from the outside picture, definitely people would probably think that's weird, that's impossible, but like he would come in here and we'd sit down and eat dinner and just feel like a normal dinner. Just hearing his stories, us telling him how everything's going with us, it just felt completely normal and natural. I think that's definitely what stood out, and it just felt right.
David Scott Korde, Bob's nephew. Bob was an amazing, terrific individual. Again, he was my father's brother who had cerebral palsy, and he inspired many, many different people throughout his life, including myself. I did not fully know what cerebral palsy was. Either did the government, either did a lot of different people, and he was an inspiration to all. I feel that this documentary that Nate Crum is doing is an amazing story to let people around the country know that even if you have a disability or a fault, that you could succeed in life tremendously. And I think it's a great attribute to Nate and care of Bob that this work is being done. One of the, I do not remember the time frame. I might have been 17, 18, 19, and I went to Indiana with Bob's father, Jack, my grandfather, and at that particular moment, I believe I said to Jack, when I get older, when I graduate college, I will assist you in taking care of Bob, and I will commit to coming out to New Jersey, to Indiana, to help with Bob, make sure things are going okay, check on the house, check on the caretakers, see the new caretakers who are in the house. And I feel that I fulfilled that commitment through the years and did not disappoint either Bob and my grandfather, or for that matter, my family. It was something that I was willing to do. I enjoyed it tremendously, and I was willing to step up and do that for the family, knowing that Bob and I were building a better relationship when I became older. I just think I was out there, and I just felt that it was a way that I could help, and it was a way for me to go out to Indiana and build the relationship that we had, and build, frankly, the relationship that I made over the years for the caretakers in Indiana, who were called Bobites, and just a nice thing to do, and I committed to that. My responsibility would be to make sure Bob was okay, make sure that the doctors were following up with Bob, made sure that the caretakers in the house were being treated properly. Bob would not tolerate any bullshit when it came to the caretakers. He joked tremendously with them, but as far as the rules in the house, they had to abide by it, and I would make sure that those particular things were being done, made sure that economically his brother Jerry was very, very supportive and was very instrumental in keeping Bob in Indiana, because he was able to economically, and the system that we had in place with the caretakers in the house. But I got great joy in just flying out to Indiana, making sure that Bob was okay. Frankly, seeing Bob, which made him happy, made sure that again, the doctors were taken care of, the guys in the house were taken care of. Bob's mental state was okay. He was doing the rehab and therapy that he needed to do. Checked the van, made sure there were no issues with the van. Anything that I could possibly do to make his life better, I felt that it was my job at the time to do from New Jersey. I think I started to take that on when I was in my mid-20s. One of the great joys of being with my grandfather on some of these trips was my grandfather was a comedian. He was a jokester just like Bob was, and and it was just a lot of fun being with them, going out to Indiana. We would walk the campus, we would walk the neighborhood, we would go out to dinner, and even a short trip felt like a long trip just because of the time that we spent together with each other out in Indiana. And another great joy was the years later of when Bob and his companions would come to New Jersey, and they would go to New York, and they would go to the restaurants, and seeing Bob in a restaurant and just sitting there enjoying himself, being around a group of people was great and tremendous. And our family does like to eat and food connoisseurs, but going to some of these restaurants was really nice. And a thank you to the caretakers who would be treated to a nice trip in New York and New Jersey. One specific trip that just really stands out was when we were walking the campus of IU and we ended up at Assembly Hall, and Bob Knight was the coach, and one of his assistants kindly asked us to leave to practice because he thought we were taking notes for the away team or watching the practice and stealing signs or whatever you want to call it. So that is one memory that I have of getting thrown out of Assembly Hall with my grandfather and my cerebral palsy uncle, which not really sure what they thought we were going to do with the information, but that was a very funny moment for me. I did go to an opera with him once, I believe. One and only time I did go to an opera with him. Bob is a opera lover. You have to acquire that taste, and I was not a huge opera lover, so I think it was one and done for Scott going to the opera with Uncle Bob. I would do anything else with Bob that he wanted to do except going to the opera. But unfortunately, as a caregiver to Bob, one of the pros is you get to travel the country and see a lot of different sights. And one of the cons is you're going to be going to an opera. Exactly. So that's a nice, at the end, it's a nice trade-off. So you just have to live and die with the opera. I do remember Uncle Bob as a little kid. Probably not as many memories that I had when I was a teen moving on. But I just considered him my uncle and a human being. And even within family, that could be a, when you're young and a child, you don't know much about why somebody's in a wheelchair or not. That is one of the stereotypes of cerebral palsy, somebody being in a wheelchair, somebody with a disability. Even at a young age, you don't know much about it until you learn about it, and that individual does have could be very intelligent, is very intelligent, and that is, Nate, as we discussed, that is one of the goals that you're trying to get out there, is right. Why we're making this documentary. Correct. Uncle Bob was a human being like everybody else, and his sister-in-law, Nancy, just treated him as a human being, part of the family, and he was a great individual within the family, and he was just one of us. Again, that all stems from Jack, my grandfather, who insisted that he not go into an institution, researched it for many, many years, put him in 3 different schools in North Dakota, put him in IU, Indiana Music School, for classes, and he blossomed and essentially became sort of the mayor of Bloomington for many, many years because he was so well liked. So that is a huge attribute to his father, his mother, and his brother Jerry. Another huge memory that I have is after graduating college, a friend of mine and I were overseas, and at one particular point, Bob was overseas also, which again is an attribute to the caretakers and the system that we had in place for Bob to travel the world. And we met Bob and his caretakers for dinner in Europe, which was just incredible because nobody ever thought that that would really be able to happen for Bob to even travel away from the United States. I don't remember where in Europe, but for some insane reason, I remember it was Indian food. It was not as easy as you would have thought, but we had planned it knowing that both of us were going to be in Europe at the same time, and we had planned to meet that day for dinner. And my friend who was with me was very compatible to do this and enjoyed it tremendously also. I do not believe that his brother shares the love of opera. I believe he will listen to it. I don't believe that he shares the love like his brother Bob did, but I know he is familiar with opera and has listened to it due to the fact that his mother Ruth was a opera lover, and I believe that's how Bob was able to get into opera. One of my favorite things to do is just having Bob over to the house and with the family and cooking a nice barbecue for him and his caretakers. We all did that, and we just all loved having Bob come to our houses to have a nice meal, to have a cooked meal, and yes, I do enjoy cooking, and even Bob in his own right would have considered himself a professional cook. He would stay in the kitchen. He would tell the guys how to prepare a meal, how to do a certain dish, and Bob was the chef from his wheelchair for many, many years. I was raised Jewish. I had a bar mitzvah. Bob was raised Jewish. He was brought up Jewish. And when he went to the Midwest, North Dakota and Indiana, he found Christianity. And that definitely was something that helped him, I believe, progress in life, was able to live longer than his life expectancy. And he had a group of individuals that he went to church with religiously every Sunday, listened to the sermons, and that was what he believed in at a certain time. So similar but not as similar. We both had our religion, and he studied his many more years after I had studied mine. But I think the most important thing to know is it was the group of people that were around him that helped him tremendously progress, because he had a core group of individuals who he deeply had bonds with, and he was just such a great man that at the end I don't believe it mattered what religion you were. There were a couple difficulties with some of the caretakers in the house. But with that said, the main goal was for Bob to get the care that he got from his caretakers. So any difficult situation that did arise was worked out amicably and professionally. And at the end, we were all there for the same end result of making sure that Bob had the care that he needed to live as long as he did. I think one of the biggest changes was, well, at the beginning, each caretaker was given room and board and expense paid trip to wherever Bob needed to go via overseas or somewhere in the United States. Years later, we were approached by Lucas Wheats, who oversaw the house for many years from the outside, that maybe we should compensate the guys economically a little bit too, because they are working, and the Korde family had agreed to that. So it was not an unrealistic amount of money that we paid the caretakers. They earned that money. So that's why it was so important that if there was an issue with one of the caretakers or there were conflicts within the house, that it get worked out very, very quickly. And I think the guys in the house were able to talk about things and make sure that none of the issues festered for a while, and they took care of it right away. And that was one of the reasons why we had an independent individual who worked from outside the house, from Bob's choosing, to make sure that things would be okay and sort of be a mediator for any conflicts, to oversee that. I think Lucas was a tremendous influence in Bob. I do not know exactly the time period of when Lucas came into the house or when he was associated with Bob, but it seemed like Lucas and Bob built an instant relationship, an instant friendship, an instant bond, and they really hit it off. And I think Lucas was very instrumental in making Bob feel comfortable in Bloomington and caring for the house when he was a caretaker inside the house, and instrumental in helping Bob with many different things that went on out in Bloomington. The history of Birch Lumber was Jack Kaplowitz, who started the business with one or two relatives. He lived approximately 5 minutes from Birch Lumber. He was offered the piece of property, if my recollection is correct, and he brought Birch Lumber, started a lumber company. We did a lot of coal mining here. We've expanded the business, and I think that was one of the keys to helping Bob, where Jack started the business in 1948, August of 1948. He was a very successful, well-liked businessman, one of the smartest guys that a lot of people knew. And he was very instrumental in making sure Bob had the means and to succeed in North Dakota and then in Bloomington. So despite the fact that Birch Lumber is a third generation business, again started August of 1948, a couple of relatives, his son Jerry Korde, second generation, and now I am third generation. This really was instrumental in obviously us having a successful business, but also a successful way to care for Bob in a roundabout way. We sell to homeowners, contractors, builders. We are a 1 yard location in Clifton, New Jersey. We're a very hands-on operation. We do compete with other lumber yards that are bigger than us. We try to treat all of our employees in a very professional manner, and we just enjoy having this business. It's a stepping stone for other things that we've been able to do on the outside, and we're just very hands-on and people oriented, and it's been a very good business with headaches and heartache here and there. I mean, I would say I loved going out to Indiana. One particular time I went out to Indiana, I figured I should give it my all, and so I decided to take Bob to the movies and let all the caretakers be free for a couple of hours. So I drove Bob to the movies, and we got to the movie theater, and I said, this is simple. This is a no issue whatsoever. Did not realize that I had to take Bob up the steps of the movie theater. Hence, me and one of the employees at the movie theater were bringing him up the steps, and my hand slipped and Bob went down the stairs. So Bob was okay. He laughed, probably called me a jackass, which is his favorite term used for the guys. And we went to see the movie, and taking care of Bob was a very rewarding, hard thing to do, but it was a lot of work, and I believe people have taken it for granted that it's an easy thing to do. So we had a couple of laughs about it. We had a good time, but it is a lot of work and hard work. But again, it is rewarding and fulfilling for me to have been able to bond with Bob for many years. I also enjoyed when my son got a little older. I would take him every year to Indiana, and we would spend 2 to 3 days there. We would take the guys out to dinner. We would hang out at the house. We would watch movies. We would tell the stories. We would look at photographs. Bob was just a regular human being, that everyone loved and enjoyed. I had a special bond with him as my uncle, and I just loved him tremendously. He was a very unique individual. He had a weird sense of humor. But he was very special in everyone's heart. I think that was one of the hardest things, to go to Indiana and see Bob in the hospital, which I've had to experience a couple of times, and see him with tubes in him, and how he's doing, and it was heartbreaking. With that said, his spirit and his energy and his willing to stay alive was tremendous, and he fought through many, many different hurdles in his life, which he had to compensate for. And I do remember another time going out to Indiana, discussing with Lucas and the guys in the house that we should be putting Bob on a feeding tube, and that was a very difficult situation. It's essentially taking an older individual's license and car away from him, despite the fact that Bob had loved to eat and loved his food. We knew that the numerous times that he was having mucus buildup and stomach issues and going back and forth to the hospital and doing chest compressions, we knew that it was the right thing to do. On the flip side, even with that, we would still go out to dinner. He would still be right there. He might have had a couple of sips of sangria, and he just enjoyed being around the people at the dinner table until essentially he was not able to do that anymore. And that's another great attribute. It was a very hard decision for me to have to come home and discuss with his brother Jerry and his sister-in-law Nancy, but it was the right decision to do. And that was probably one of the harder things that I've had to deal with Bob. The everyday stuff that the caretakers did was extremely, extremely difficult. Lifting him up in his chair, giving him a shower, taking care of him. But that was a very hard decision. It was the right decision. And as a team, we discussed it and made it work. It is amazing to see an individual who's, well, number one, they didn't know much about the cerebral palsy when Bob was younger. They obviously had tremendous growth of dealing with it through the years. But like you said, Nate, he never missed a beat, and he was always very joyful. And for an individual whose life expectancy was to live to 30, and he lived till he was in his mid-70s, is a tremendous feat for many, and it just showed the character and the will and the joy of life that Robert Kaplowitz had. I think it's a great project that has been done. I think it's a great learning experience for many people, and I just have enjoyed being part of this project for Robert Kaplowitz.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I'm Molly Brawer. I'm Bob's niece. My dad's Barney Brawer, my aunt's Irv, and my grandmother's Charlotte. So the funny thing is, I was trying to, recall memories and of growing up with Bob, because my memories go from 0 to like age 12 or something. When Charlotte and Jack got divorced, and then I saw him a few times after that. But I was in high school, and it was like I regret that I didn't see him more, but definitely the memories are from my early childhood, and so they're weird, but it's interesting it's sort of interesting what you don't remember, right? Like what you remember. So I remember things like his shoes and his eyeglass, what's that called?
Strap at the end, yeah. Yeah.
And his bed that I would sleep in when he wasn't there, and it was so hard, things like that. And the straws, I remember the straws. And I remember how he would grab the straw and how good he was at getting the straw, and just that like the skill, at least those things, right? Those are the things. And then I was thinking about the straws, and I was thinking how Charlotte always had straws forever until she died at 91. She always had straws in her apartment in New York, and she would always drink with straws. And I just, it's not like in her water or whatever. And I just, so those are like and then the biggest, there's this memory I have of, so I remember that like something that my dad would light up. My dad would be funnier. He would be his funniest, his most happy when Bob was around. And, we'd go down to New Jersey, or we'd go down to Florida. And then sometimes Bob would be there, sometimes he wouldn't, or we'd go to the Kordes. But I remember mostly and I was probably like sitting on my dad's lap or sitting right there. And I just, over the years would, it was just like, I got to know Bob through what him and my dad would talk about and what they would joke about.
Yeah.
But then and so I could understand Bob. I don't remember, like, there was never a point of, anyways, I don't even know, I'm going on about this. I mean, it was just him at his most, his true self kind of thing. And it was just like, everything was good. When Bob was there, everything was good. And everybody was happy. And there was laughter, and it was and it was just so normal. It was just so normal that when I was reading the book, I guess I read his book when it came out, when I was like 15 or something, and I haven't read it since. And I just finished reading again. And there was one part where a friend, Bob describes how a friend, how was such a good friend that the friend fed him. And I thought, Bob didn't like feed himself, like he didn't bring them. And that's when I remembered the straw, and I was like, no, I guess he didn't. And then I suddenly just had this flashback of my dad and maybe I think Jack, and they're just like, he's eating and they're feeding him, and it's just like it was just such a normal part of my growing up that it didn't even, and it wasn't like, I don't know. And it was just a beautiful little memory that I had. It was wonderful to not remember that, because it was just so, like, it was just so normal. And I mean, in that, so that's it's easy to see now, 30 years later, how much he impacted me.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, it was just normal, but
Yeah.
now it's profound. I mean, I think about him. I teach English. I teach English to adult learners from other countries, and I think about Bob at least every day, like every other day, like because what I learned from my parents, what I learned observing my parents, and what I just got from gained from osmosis, through osmosis, and I didn't realize I had these skills until I suddenly started finding myself in situations where things felt easy that seemed like they should be hard because I'd never experienced them before.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like this ability to listen, to see beyond to listen, to try to understand no matter how much someone's struggling to speak, and to not at all like have no thoughts in my brain are going, this person isn't smart because they're not able to convey what they're trying to say in English. And I mean, not that I'm never judgmental. There obviously judgmental thoughts come in, and like any, for all of us, but especially when I'm listening to someone speak, and I find that helps as a teacher, and it makes me feel like it's what I'm supposed to be doing, and
Mm-hmm.
and Bob's a big part of that, because I don't know how I could have learned that skill if I hadn't just seen it done by my parents. And my mom's really good at it too. And that part of my education growing up was there was the things that were, it was about, there was a clear focus on like helping me understand before I even, like, I don't remember learning this. I just always remember understanding this. So they must have been teaching me from a very young age before I could even really, that, if you have trouble understanding somebody, or if you don't get it, it's probably you probably need to do something. You probably need to listen harder. You probably need to it's not their fault that you don't understand them. And also that, like, our different levels of comprehension of things isn't a reflection of our worth, or that we also, because my this is another thing, is that another like piece of it is that my mom's first cousin was mentally handicapped, and it was my mom's first cousin, and so we would go to New York. Grew up in Boston. We would go to New York, and we didn't see him as often as we saw Bob, but every so often we would see him. And so my parents, I just remember understanding that Billy had a body, he looked fine, everything looked fine, but he was probably more at my mental, like he didn't have the mental abilities past age 8 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that Bob might look that, like, you wouldn't know that some people who looked like Bob also had mental challenges like Billy had, but that Bob didn't have those challenges, and that Bob was just as smart as everybody in their own. In fact, and that not only that, but that he was always seen it, and also because it was so wonderful when he was there, like, it wasn't explicitly said, but that he was better than the rest of us. It wasn't just that he was the same, he was better.
Yeah.
That Billy wasn't worse, and that Bob, and Billy also was special. Like, that we loved going to see Billy, and we loved going to see Bob. It wasn't like we did it because we should, or it was like we wanted, just, I don't know. So it was a blessing. I feel really blessed.
I'm Barney Brawer, and I'm the stepbrother of Bob Kaplowitz. And my relationship with him had a lot of layers and complexity to it because we met each other when we were both about 13 years old. His mother had died a few years before that, and my father died when I was about 3 and a half. So I had grown up with my sister and my mother, and as others have indicated, my mother was a pretty powerful person in many, many ways. And then she was dating this man named Jack Kaplowitz, and he had a son named Bob who had cerebral palsy. And I really didn't know anything about what it meant to have cerebral palsy. We were living in the town of Fair Lawn, New Jersey, and the only person I knew at that point in my life who had a handicap was a person named Susan Schlam, who lived down the block from us in Fair Lawn, and who got polio just before the polio shots came out. Our town was an early adopter of the Salk vaccine, and she got polio a week before the scheduled shots or something. And so she was in a wheelchair when we went to, and she was my age, to Memorial Junior High School. And what was significant was the building of Memorial Junior High School was brand new, and it had an elevator. So she became the first person in a wheelchair to be mainstreamed, as we would now call it, in a regular classroom. And she lived down the block. And I'm going to fast forward. I've been a teacher and an educator all my life, so the issues about education have become the work that I've done in my adult life. And so my mother had been a widow as long as I could remember, and she was a very active person. So there were relationships and men in her life who we met sometimes, and sometimes my grandmother was often babysitting. And my mother sold mutual funds, which back then, this is the 1950s, were a kind of new thing. But she would often meet with potential clients in their homes, a man and his wife. And so her going out in the evening was sometimes work, sometimes more, entertainment, a date. And Grandma was always around. Grandma really didn't have her own home. So that was just part of how we grew up. And then she started dating a man named Jack Kaplowitz, and he had a son who was my age. And one day, I guess he brought Bob to our house. I can't even remember how we first met, but that's when I began to know who Bob is, as a person, both an extraordinary human being, an extraordinary individual, and someone with a handicap unlike anything I had ever encountered, except for the girl down the street who had polio. And Bob's handicap was, in a sense, more extreme because it affected his speech. Hers affected only her ability to walk. And so then my mother, Charlotte, and Jack were dating, and at a certain point it became clear, or they announced to us, that they were going to marry each other, and I was going to have a new stepfather and a new stepbrother, 2 new stepbrothers. And we were going to move to Passaic, which is where Jack's house was. So I got to know Bob, and we were almost the same age. He loved to tell people I was his baby brother by 2 months, right? But in junior high and then in high school, we lived very different lives because my mother brought me to Passaic. She was extremely unhappy with the quality of schooling in the Passaic public schools, and I was pretty unhappy. And so she found for me a private school in New York City, and beginning in 9th grade, I commuted every day to a private school called the Birchwathen School. I was the only student in the school who commuted, and I would go with the men, mostly men, who were business people going into New York City. And so each day I was gone to New York, and my friends were all people, young men and women who lived in New York, and I would sometimes stay over with them because we got into folk music, and we would go down to Greenwich Village and hear Bob Dylan and some of the folk singers who were just becoming famous back then, and we played guitar, and I'd stay overnight, and we ourselves would go to Washington Square with our guitars and play folk music in New York. So I had a life in that way in New York, and Bob was going to different schools because it was clear that my mother had strong feelings about the potential that Bob had cognitively and who he was and was his whole life as a person, and that the schools, which could fit him with braces and do physical exercises, were not designed to educate his mind. And that, I would say, infuriated her. She was a person of strong opinions, and she had grown up with a crippled father and was humiliated, embarrassed. He had been one of the leaders of his generation, and then he was a lawyer, and then he founded an automobile business that he gave to his brother-in-law because he hated doing the automobile business, and founded a school on the Lower East Side to teach immigrants how to pass the exam so they could go to City College in New York for free. And that was the dream of his life. And she was his pet child. And then he got the flu in the great flu epidemic of 1916, followed by a series of diseases, and finally Parkinson's disease. So she grew up with this man who had been this extraordinary father when she was a little girl, and who became so handicapped that she was humiliated to let her friends see him. And they had no income. So they lived on charity, and her feelings about her father and the loss of who he had been. And she was old enough when he got sick that she knew who he had been, and it was God. And then she met Bob, and the thought that the same tragedy could happen to her new stepson just became her passionate task and adventure, and there was no doubt about it. If you read Bob's book, there were times when he would kind of slip into being kind of passive and just accepting things, and she was tough because she knew that the odds were against him, and she knew how horrible the outcome could be. She had lived with it. So that's the family we were part of all of a sudden, and we were both the same age but living very different lives. We became stepbrothers when we were just beginning. We're finishing 8th grade, the age of 8th grade, and then I was going to high school, and then I went off to college. So we didn't live together in the same house all that much, but what I learned from Bob and from being in his world and seeing his world, I think made me the teacher and educator that I became professionally, because I understood how high the stakes are, and sometimes it's a disease like cerebral palsy, sometimes it's the horrendous quality of urban schools and kids with potential just searching and not finding the education that they were entitled to. And given Bob's Christianity, I can't say it became my crusade, but I guess I can't think of what the word is that to replace that with. But that's the beginning, and I would learn what was happening to some degree when I'd come home from school when I was in high school, and then all the way through college. I started tutoring kids. I went to Yale, which is in New Haven, and got very involved with programs. New Haven's a very poor city for many of its families, and I got involved with an organization called Dwight Hall, which was technically the Young Men's Christian Association at Yale, but was also the place where all the volunteer programs where undergraduates were involved in the city were organized through Dwight Hall. And Yale at that time was an all-men's college, so Dwight Hall and being involved in New Haven was a way of occasionally meeting people of the other gender, of course, school teachers and people in schools, many of them were women, young women. And that became pretty central to what I did in college. I became the student director of the tutoring program, recruiting other Yale undergraduates. And there was a Master of Arts in Teaching, a small master's program that was mostly women at Yale. And so we were the people who were interested in working with kids. And it was, I would say, the thing that was most interesting to me, and of all the things that happened in college, was that work. And then I became a teacher. And then Bob and I lived kind of parallel lives in different places, because academically, until my mother finally found the Crippled Children's School in North Dakota, Bob's education was minimal, his academic education. And what we learned over the years as members of his family was the incredible intellectual capacity that was concealed behind, I just have to show some. He would talk like that. So it took a long time for a sentence to get out. And then over the years, as Bob got older, and he began eventually living with a household full of young men at the University of Indiana. And Bob's mother, when Bob was little, before she passed away, had done a lot of thinking about what can this boy do when he can't go out and run and play with the other kids. And she loved music and she loved opera. And he became not only interested in opera, but knowledgeable about it as a boy, and then through his whole life. And, and I think I was only once at his house in Bloomington, but the shelves, his bedroom, there were shelves with hundreds, maybe more than that, of the recordings of operas. And it would be, it was La Traviata, there would be 4 or 5 different versions of it, the one done, at the Metropolitan Opera in New York and the one with this famous opera singer, right? And Bob, when he, was relaxing, would want to listen to an opera, and he would ask for, the recording from 1957 in Milan with this person is singing the baritone and this person singing the soprano, right? And if you pulled out a recording of that opera with different, he would listen to it and get upset because he hadn't looked carefully for the one that he was actually listening to. So his intellectual capacity was stunning, especially in comparison to the incredible, painful slowness of a sentence. And I'll say one other thing, just as an introduction to my connection with Bob. You may, in watching this film, know that Bob wrote a book called Don't Ignore My Mind. And when it first came out, the first version of that, there were people who doubted that Bob had actually written it because his speech was so painfully slow. And he, over the years, occasionally could type, and I'll show you how that went. It was like this. Equally slow and painful. And the book reads so fluently and beautifully. And so someone I knew asked me, did Bob really write this? And I said, absolutely, he wrote it because there are things in it that nobody else knew. He describes meeting me and my sister Irvine. He describes his father telling him that his mother had died. Who could possibly have written that, right? So that's who he was all through our lives. They were kind of caretaking facilities at their worst, and he was at some places that were horrendous. They were warehouses, a place to put the kid during the day. And at their best, they were not very academic. These were all kids who had to practice walking and who didn't walk at all or very well and whose speech was hard to understand. So it was not unusual. It was, in fact, the standard that their intellectual capacity was underestimated. Because if someone only speaks as slowly as Bob speaks, they don't ever say sentences that knock you over in their fluidity and realizing how complex the idea is behind that sentence. And I'm sorry that it chokes me up to say this, but because of how my mother had grown up with her father, who she knew was an incredibly intellectual human being, but no one who encountered him knew that once he got sick. But she knew it. And we have actually the diary that he wrote and the book that he wrote, so we have some of the things about who he was as an educator. So she knew that there was like a fog screen that people couldn't see the intellectual capacity in this person because the disability was so overwhelming and for most people pretty new. And even at the schools that he went to, it wasn't new. And it was before the revolution in special education where the laws required kids with special needs. So the schools were like charity, and he would get loaded into a taxi cab and ride for an hour and a half, 2 hours to a school in Newark that was a warehouse. I mean, there were places that were horrible. And my mother just knew that Bob had an intellect and a personality, and that underneath all the disability, that there was a brilliant human being who needed to be educated, who deserved to be educated, who could be educated. And the question is, where does such a school exist? And she was a powerful go-getter who was not going to be dissuaded. She might be really pissed off, and she might be really upset and angry and determined, but she was not someone who would be dissuaded. And she had made a life for herself when my father died. She had started selling mutual funds because she and her sister, my Aunt Flossie, sat down. This is 1952, and they asked each other, "What's something that because there were debts. He died, leaving her debts he'd never told her about. In 1952, what is something where they have to pay a woman what they pay a man?" And the answer is sales. If you sell a product, you get your commission, and if you're on straight commission. So she started selling mutual funds, which were new in the 1950s. But she had this powerful story to tell. She said, have you thought about putting away some money for the future? And then she would say, neither did I. And I thought I was set for life. And then my husband died and discovered not only did we have no money, we had debts he had never told me about, right? But if you set aside this much money each, right? So she was very successful at that. And she had an experience that I went to college in the 60s. Okay, so I started college in 1965, graduated in 1969. That was the beginning of what we now call the women's movement. Okay, it was unlike anything that had happened since the suffragettes, and it was the young women who, I went to Yale, we'd go to Vassar and have dates, or a mixer or something like that, but that's who the women were, who were developing a new kind of strength and fierceness and determination, and those were the women I was attracted to because that's what my mother was. And her becoming like that had been the just mixture of the inherent talents and fate, and the fierce determination was growing up, seeing how horrible it could be. So she was determined, and in the book, Bob tells about all the different places that he went.
Places.
They'd be that's all there was. Oh, is the camera running?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. This was before the laws about special education. There was no requirement at all that children with special needs had to be educated. The school districts were not required to offer anything. So everything was just charity, terribly funded, terribly understaffed. The teachers had not been trained in any of the things that are needed to work with handicapped students. They were considered just not to have, they were just ignored and hidden away in places that were horrendous. But there was a pretense that these places were not so bad. And if you sent your kid to a place and almost never visited him, and he or she might not be very verbal, the families may not have known how horrible the places were, or just have felt there was no other alternative. But there were some people, and Seymour Saracen was a professor at Yale in psychology, who was involved in the creation of the first programs for children with serious disabilities, and there were lawsuits in Connecticut and in Massachusetts that it was unconstitutional for children to be warehoused the way they were. So he was my professor, and so I was beginning to understand the history of the horrors, right? At the same time that my mother was fighting that those horrors for damn sure were not going to happen to her son. And in Bob's book, he describes all the places she went. And, she was not afraid to go to Washington, D.C. and sit for 2 hours waiting to talk to a congressman or waiting to talk to somebody at Health and Human Services, right? And then get a lead about some place, and then getting on an airplane and going and seeing the place and saying, oh my God, this was touted as a wonderful place, and it's appalling. And then the Rusk Institute was a kind of turning point. It was a disappointment in that it was well known, it was famous, it was the place. It was in New York, near us in New Jersey. And so her hope and our hope was that they would help find a school for Bob.
Could you explain what the Rusk Institute was?
It's a big hospital institute dealing with young people with handicaps. That's all I knew about it, and that it was famous, and it's in New York. And Dr. Rusk was touted as a hero, okay? It was not helpful for Bob, except that we, and my mother and met young people with handicaps whose lives were amazing. And there's one who's, I believe in Bob's book, named Juan. Juan was from one of the Latin American countries. I can't remember whether it was El Salvador or Argentina. He was from a Spanish-speaking country. And he was probably a thalidomide baby. There was a drug that was given to pregnant women, I think to reduce the cramps. I'm not sure why, but and after the drug was supposed to be it was discovered that it caused birth defects that were horrendous, right? And so for a period of time, there were thalidomide babies all around the world, okay? And Juan's disability, Juan had 3 fingers on his shoulder. That's all, no arms, just 3 fingers. And he was about Bob's age, except he was getting ready to go to college, I think at Columbia University, okay? Juan, as I remember the story, I was told, had been found in a garbage can. By nuns who heard a crying baby. And so he was raised by nuns who discovered that he was smart and he had no family. And he was about to go to Columbia University, I think, to work on his doctorate in computer programming. This is a long time ago. And he was at the Rusk Institute for an evaluation. They did a lot of evaluations, but he was Bob's roommate, right? And you meet this kid, 3 fingers on each shoulder, who was found in a garbage can and is about to be at the top of his field and one of the top earnings, individuals in the country he came from, right? Knows computer stuff when none of us knew what computers were, right? So the Rusk Institute gave my mother, and through her, gave us access to people who would overcome huge disabilities, right? And that led her to kind of be even more determined. There has to be a place And she went many places, and was disappointed to see that they didn't live up to the hype, that they were encouraging her to lower her expectations, which she would not do. And then somebody mentioned that in North Dakota, there was a school called the Crippled Children's School, not the most elegant name, but that's what it was called, run by a woman named Ann Carlson. It's now, I think, called the Carlson Institute, or it's named after her, in North Dakota, in a little town, right? So in this little town, so Dr. Carlson, who was the head of the school, had been born with little arms that were just stumps. I don't know what was at the end of the stumps, but her arms were stopped before the elbow, okay? And her legs, which we never saw, because she was in skirts and had artificial legs, I think were equally short stumps, okay? And she had grown up in this town, and she had gone to elementary school, and she had learned to hold a pencil between her hands like that, and she'd been an excellent student, and she'd gone to high school in this little town, and then she'd gone to college with no program to support handicapped students, and she'd become certified as a teacher, and she was the English teacher at the high school. Right? Like, oh, she can do this, right? And an amazing human being. And at some point, people said, you need to start a school for everybody who like you needs a school. So she did. And you read the stories of who she was. I never met her, but when Bob went, she was there, Dr. Carlson. And the stories of, in one of the books about the Carlson Institute, it's a description of the day that they opened the school, the Crippled Children's School, and there was a big ceremony somewhere, okay? And the Crippled Children's School had kids with all kinds of disabilities. There was one who was flat on a table. He couldn't lift it. He had no ability to sit up at all, but the table had wheels, and he was quite an adventure. There were all kinds of kids with different categories of disabilities. And this story is that on the opening day, when they were having the ceremony with all the dignitaries and so on, a group of the kids were in the wood shop building a raft to put on the river, which ran past the school. Okay? And they had built the raft. All the grown-ups were busy off somewhere else. They had built the raft and had dragged it down to the river and into the water, right? And the kid whose brainchild this was in a wheelchair, okay? He had figured out how to do this and had led the whole team of kids doing this, right? And then he was on the raft and it started to float away down the river. And the kids realized they had to go tell some grown-ups, right? So somehow they go racing to the grown-ups to say, I don't know the kid's name, is in his wheelchair and he's floating down the river. And so everybody rushes there and Dr. Carl, right? And the kids are saying, oh, they're going to be mad at us, right? And Dr. Carlson was so impressed that they had built this raft. Yeah, you kids need to think a little more about safety, right? But their fear that they would be punished, they'd be kicked out of the school and so on, was the opposite of who she was. And so he went to that school. And there was Juan, the kid who couldn't sit up. So the whole town adopted the school. The school was, so Bob, when he was there, and he was a teenager, he could go on a date with a girl from the school, and the taxi cab would come, and they'd both be in wheelchairs, and the cab driver would come to the school and load each of them into their seats in the cab, and then load the wheelchairs into however they did, right, and take them to the movie theater, and get them into their wheelchairs and take them down to their seats and get them into their seats, and they'd watch the movie, and then the cab driver would come back and load them in and take them out for ice cream. Like a real date, right? And for the town, this was their mission, who they were. And the kid on the wheel, on the flat on the table, his specialty was shoplifting. He'd get wheeled into town, and if you wanted something, he could grab it and put it underneath him and bring you back the chewing gum that you wanted, or God knows what. And it was a delightful school, which understood, the kids shouldn't be stealing, right? But these were not kids who were going to be held back. And all of a sudden, Bob was in the right place. He went on, I did not see him go on dates. I heard about how he'd say, how does that work? And, we'd hear.
You know if he ever did that?
I don't. He was certainly interested in members of the female gender, and I'm an old man. I don't think I ever went to the school, although I have a picture of it in my mind. Of course, I've heard so much about it, and I've seen some video and so on. But my mother was the one who, found the place and knew that it was the place, and they understood how smart Bob was, and there were lots of teachers. I don't think I've ever seen a school like this anywhere else. Many of the teachers were handicapped in different ways. There were teachers who were blind, there were teachers who were in wheelchairs, there were teachers, right? And that made clear that there were no limits. Yeah. And it made it clear to everyone who knew them, and they were in what in New Jersey we call the middle of nowhere. They're in North Dakota, so they weren't known. And my mother, this is in Bob's book, was furious that some of the people she had spoken to knew of the school and had not told her about it. Heaven knows why. Oh, I do know. I've been a school principal. The law says now that every child, no matter how handicapped, is entitled to be educated and well educated, okay? That is not widely believed by ordinary people, sometimes by people who are basically good people. The instinct to lower expectations, because it's hard to yell at a kid who's already incredibly handicapped and to say, this is unacceptable, do this again. No, and I can tell you when I learned it from Jack, Bob's dad. We were just getting to know this family that we were about to become married into, right? And Jack was a very mellow, happy, wonderful, charming human being. And we were out on the sidewalk in front of Bob's house, and Bob had his cane and was walking down to, I think the car may have been parked at the curb, right? And I was there, and we were walking down to the car. I don't know where we were going. We were going somewhere. And Bob fell hard, kind of face down on the cement sidewalk, walkway, right? And I rushed over to help him get up. And Jack, my stepfather-to-be, said, don't. If you do it, he will never do it for himself. And at that point, before Bob's adolescent growth spurt really made him even more made it even more difficult, right? Bob could, with the cane, get himself back up on his feet. And when you say, why are expectations lowered, it's hard to watch that. It's hard for caring people whose instinct feels like caring to realize, don't help him get up. He's got to learn how to do that. And it's painful and it's hard and he's struggling. And just what feels, without thinking, like the nice thing to do is in fact lowering what this handicapped person is capable of doing. Now, that phenomenon is everywhere with every kind of handicap. I've now been a principal in urban schools of kids whose families are horrendously dysfunctional, of kids who have serious disabilities. We did an art project at our school. The school was, I was a principal in South Boston in a very old brick school that had no handicapped access at all, okay? And it had about 20 steps to get up into the front door, and the first floor was way above, like higher than your head, okay? And there was no elevator, there was nothing. It had no handicapped access at all. And we were doing a history project about some events in the Revolutionary War that happened where our school was, and the kids were doing artwork. And there's an artist in Boston named Sidewalk Sam, and Sidewalk Sam was a person in a wheelchair, very handicapped, who did chalk drawings on the sidewalk in Harvard Square, and was a well-known artist in Boston, okay? And someone arranged for Sidewalk Sam to come to our school and help our kids with the artwork, right? And there's no way to get him into the school except to lift the wheelchair and carry it up literally 20 steps, and they're not even straight up. You go up the side and then you go up this way, right? And we almost dropped him. Somebody slipped, right? I was there. We almost dropped him, okay? Thank God we didn't, right? Somebody caught the wheelchair and was in the right place at the right moment, right? But to take the chances, it just seems incorrectly like the caring thing is to do it for the handicapped person. It comes from a place that feels like you're doing the kind thing, when in fact you are making you are teaching the handicapped person to not do it for her or himself. And especially because handicaps, there's so many different kinds of handicaps, and you don't know what this individual person can do. So you have to have a clear vision of what the law says should happen, that the young person or the child, the adult, should be educated to their highest potential. But where that is, and you have to watch the struggle. You know, in films that are about athletics, you watch the coach do this, but he's doing it with, football players who are all muscular and fast on their feet, and right? It's that kind of basketball team. You've seen those movies in sports, right? But to do it with someone who could fall down the stairs and break his nose, or be even more, right? Your instincts are I used to give this speech a lot, your instincts in relation to that person are your best and your worst moves. And it takes conscious self-training and thought and seeing and thinking and experimenting to separate both the things that feel like caring that are your best moves and the things that feel like caring that are your worst moves. And most people don't know enough handicapped people to have experienced that personally with someone they know and love, and who has far more potential than people think when they first meet that person, right? Or they are in schools and organizations and institutions which so routinely underestimate what handicapped human beings can do that it's just standard. It's not even, you know, you see one movie about Helen Keller, right? But it's as if there's only one Helen Keller, not that there are 30 Helen Kellers hidden in that school where they're not going to become who she became. Oh, it's very, handicaps are all different kinds. Somebody's in a car accident, and what that car accident damaged in their body is entirely different than somebody else who's in a car accident, right? And the dilemma of it is that your instinctive responses, unless you've thought about this, are the source of your best and your least helpful responses. And most people don't have any chance to talk about this. It's embarrassing to talk about it. It's certainly embarrassing to ask a handicapped person, do you need help? That situation was almost 100% of everybody in the years before you were born. It's only in your lifetime that we've understood how complex that is and how to do it better, right?
We're probably still learning.
Oh, we are learning, and everyone has to learn individually, and it's individualized for the person who may need help, because each person who needs help may need a different kind of help, right? And that's true both if the person is a stranger and also if the person is someone you think you know very well, but you're wrong about they could have done that, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And it's very individual for the person who wants to help, who doesn't know, is it rude to acknowledge that this person is handicapped, that this
Right.
person seems to be blind,
Right.
and is, learn how to do that by doing it.
Right.
It's only the 10th time or the 30th time that you say to a stranger, do you need a hand getting across the street? That it comes out in a way that the person says, oh no, there's a buzzer on this street. I live here. There's a buzzer. Right?
Yep.
It's the person who wants to help has to have done that enough times to know how to say it in a polite way, right? And the person who needs help has to be able to respond,
Yep.
right? And so if you don't do it much, you go through your whole life thinking, I don't know whether I should have helped that person. I don't know, right?
Well, to start with, I'm Jerry Korde. I'm Bob's older brother. I'm 77 years old. I was born in 1943. I'm approximately 5 years older than Bob. Now you probably want to know why my name is different than Bob's. When I married Nancy, on the way home from college, my father and Nancy and we were engaged at the time, decided that Kaplowitz might be a little long for my business endeavors, because I, on leaving college, was working in the wholesale business, and I was selling to a lot of my father's competitors, and I was also, it was just a lot easier. So I changed my name from Kaplowitz to Korde, but it was sanctioned by my father. Otherwise, I would never have done it. And that's how the difference is on the name change. But going back even further, I was born in Passaic, New Jersey, and I lived there till I went to college, till I was 17, 18 years old. And during that time, Bob was born 5 years later, and as you know, he was born with cerebral palsy. And when he was approximately 11 years old, our mother passed away at age 42. And she was the strong influence in Bob's love of opera, classical music, and all things of that ilk. I did not follow along in that trait. I had other hobbies, which I can go into later. And Bob evolved into somewhat of a music aficionado. He was born, as I say, 5 years later on May 8th, and that's where the story starts. My mother and father, my mother's maiden name was Ruth Provisor, my father was Jack Kaplowitz. They met while my father was working in a ladies' clothing store. My mother came in, and he waited on her, and he asked her for her address and phone number, and he called her, and one thing led to another, and they married. And then my father was in the Navy during World War II. He was stationed in Virginia, and he used to write home or correspond with my mother every day. Unfortunately, my mother died when she was 42. And after that, it was just Bob, my father, and myself in the house. And that's another thing that evolved in Bob, was his culinary ability, because my father was a very accomplished chef, as my mother had been. And my father wound up taking Chinese cooking courses, Spanish cooking courses, and all the while we did this at home, Bob, myself, and my father. About a year and a half to 2 years after my mother passed away, my father met a lady named Charlotte Brawer and married her. After that, I went off to college to the University of Cincinnati, and I went in the business school there. Graduating from the University of Cincinnati, I became engaged to Nancy, and I started in the wholesale lumber business. Okay, so we're up to the point where I was working in the wholesale business, changed my name from Kaplowitz to Korde because I was selling to competitors. I stayed there for 3 years, was offered the opportunity to take over the business, but I knew that I was going to go with my father. And at that point, we were branching into other things. We branched into the motel industry. We had a number of motels. We also went into healthcare. We went into investing in apartments. And then subsequently, we've evolved into a number of other things, small pieces of liquor stores through a friend, and other types of various unrelated to the lumber business industry, which has helped with diversification, especially in this type of economy. But I guess that's pretty much enough about me. I can tell you my interests. I like to run in the morning, swim when it's at all possible in a backyard pool. I'm also an historian and an antique gun collector for the most part. I collect guns, American antiques from 1750 to 1880, and other various historical items. I also like to cook, mainly because Nancy does not cook, but that's a horse of a different color. And I guess that's enough about me. Now, my relationship with Bob has always been good. You say it's a challenge? Of course. no matter who you're with, whether you're with Bob or anybody else, there's a challenge. But Bob brings certain things to the table, I think, over and above what some other people do, via his sense of humor, his superb outlook on life, his ability to interpret and know all about music, opera, classical, conductors, all of those things, of which I know nothing about. And basically, that's it. Oh, I also like to play golf, getting back to me a little bit. But with Bob, as I say, he has gone through a number of stages in his life. I remember some of the schools he was at, because I was away at college while he was attending some of these schools. There was one that stands out just because of the name, was in Devil's Lake, North Dakota. So that one you have a tendency not to forget. And then after that, how he got to the University of Indiana is a horse of a different color also. I believe there was somebody in one of the White House administrations that was an advocate for handicapped people. And they used Bob as a test case. They knocked down walls, they put up ramps, they found somebody to live and help him and to take care of him and help him attend classes. And he moved, he was at the University of Indiana and got his degree there. And then just being in Bloomington, which is sort of revolves around the campus of IU, I think that was one of the main things that attracted Bob to this area. And we bought a house out here, which is right near the campus. And Bob has been able to successfully live here for quite a period of time. I won't say how long, because that might be confidential, and Bob can tell you more about that than I can. And I think that's it. And then Nancy will also go into our background, how we met, the history of the children, grandchildren, and trials and tribulations of that, and the relationship they have with Bob.
Awesome.
I guess I should add, in some way, that my father was the solid rock, the mainstay of pretty much the whole deal.
Yeah.
And that would be important. And let's see if we can add that in. My father was born in 1914, also in Passaic. And as I say, he was, when my mother passed away, he was the mainstay that provided for Bob and myself. And he always had a fantastic outlook on life. In addition to being probably one of the smartest, if not the smartest person I ever met. And he was a tremendous role model for Bob, myself, my children, and he was fortunate enough to be have a sense of value and instill upon my grandchildren and his great-grandchildren. And his ancestors, I believe, came from Poland. His father died when he was 16. He had wanted to be an architect but couldn't afford to go to college, so he never did. But he was just one of these self-made, smart, intelligent people that just rose above everything and became what I would consider a tremendous success. I was fortunate to be put on the board of a public company in our area where I stayed for 30 years, about 30 years. And I have no illusions that if my father had been younger, he would have been the one that was appointed. And but I was there for 30 years when the average tenure of a public company board member is 10 years. So that was something else. But all of these values and everything were instilled by him.
You said that your dad was served during World War II.
He served in the Navy.
Did he go anywhere during that time?
No, he was fortunate. He was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, and he was a teacher. He taught some of the I'll call them less fortunate people from some of the Tennessee, Kentucky areas and, help them because at that time some of the education was a little sparse in some of those Appalachian areas.
So you said Polish. That's your family. That's what you think is
Yes,
that?
I think they came, they originally migrated from Poland.
Was there a reason? Do you know?
It was, I don't know because the longevity in this country has been pretty long.
Yeah.
Even before the war.
So you haven't mentioned your family is Jewish. Is this
Yes.
correct? So, but it had nothing to do with that you know of.
No, it really didn't. We are Jewish, and where we don't practice tremendously, we are Jewish. We like the heritage, the history, and we try to instill that. We try to instill that in children, grandchildren, and so forth. And my father, where he didn't go to temple because I guess you might say he got, I don't want to say a bad taste for believing in things when my mother died so young and, other unfortunate things that happened. But he always supported the temple and was always very, very friendly with a very, very prominent rabbi from where he grew up in Passaic, New Jersey. And he was always, very attentive to Judaism and everything, even though we were, I guess you'd call us very reformed.
Bob would have been 11 and you would have been about 16 then.
Correct.
When your mother passed.
Yeah.
So I guess the other thing that I'm wondering about is kind of what care for Bob looked like maybe before your mother passed and then how that would, because obviously all of a sudden,
right.
all that weight is put on your dad.
Before my mother passed, there was a local school in the Passaic Clifton area that did accept handicapped people, and Bob went there and had a very good relationship with a lot of the people there and formed a lot of friendships. So this was a specialized school for students that were handicapped. And I believe it was in Clifton, Bob? Or Passaic? Clifton. I think so.
I think it was from the book, yeah.
And my mother was very involved with that. It was it was called the Cerebral Palsy Center.
So how did that switch? Do you remember, what was it like caring for, did you have responsibilities with caring for Bob when you were young?
Sure. We had an intercom system set up in the house because Bob was on the main floor and my bedroom was two floors up. And I could hear, and if my folks would go out, I would, I was responsible. I was there, and I think that helped develop a keen sense of hearing for him because I was always attuned when I was home and I was in my room if Bob needed something, and I think my hearing is pretty good to this day. And I truly believe that's one of the reasons.
Huh. Do you have a fond memory of you and Bob or you and your family childhood?
We did everything together. We went to at certain times we went to the Jersey Shore together as a family at Belmar. And we did take, I know at least one, possibly two trips to Florida where we drove to Florida, to Miami, and we were all, stayed at the beach and everything. And things of that ilk, and we would do that, and that was before I went to college, or before Bob was 11 when he was young, and it was a lot easier to handle and manage at that time.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about what? Because obviously, right now Bob he's in a wheelchair,
right?
Always. Everything he needs to be picked up.
Right.
So what's the difference?
The difference is at the time, he was smaller, which made it easier. Number one. Number two, they tried a number of different techniques to keep him mobile vis-a-vis braces and stuff, which didn't really work out very well. And then eventually he transformed into wheelchair bound, and but there were different things at different times that were tried. There was also, I believe, a pacemaker installed, that to help relieve some of the muscle spasms and everything that he's subjected to.
There's a story in his book about him taking a letter opener to school because he had planned to stab one of his teachers. Do you remember this story?
No, that's that's pretty good. You should be in jail, Bob, instead of.
Well, he said so. In the book it says that.
I don't remember that at all.
So he took the letter opener. It was at the Cerebral Palsy Center.
Yeah.
And there was, I guess, there's one lady who worked there, and there was a music instructor who he loved, and they would come over to the house and stuff. But then there was one who was just evil, and nobody could stand her. So he took the letter opener, for whatever reason, didn't use it, got home, your dad saw it and asked him about it. And then he said he put it somewhere where Bob can't get to it. And then sometime later, some other kid tried to attack the lady himself.
Successfully?
Tried to, at least. So
you know what? I don't remember that.
You remember that, yeah.
But, I'm going to be 78 years old.
No, definitely.
I remember most things, but gee, I don't know how that one escaped me.
Well, there's a lot I don't remember, and I'm not barely 36.
Well,
so
that's what. Okay.
He was good.
I thought he was great. I loved it. I loved it. It's great hearing things. It's like I've read Bob's book and I've talked about things, but just to hear the little differences and the things.
Right.
So yeah, that was sweet.
So Bob, how'd you like listening to him? Jerry's version.
We now have it memorialized.
Yeah. So did anything surprise you about what Jerry said? Was Jerry correct?
You can introduce both of us.
Okay. I'm Nancy. I met Jerry freshman year, college, University of Cincinnati, 1961. Actually, December 3rd, 1961. We were introduced, Jerry wanted to be actually introduced to this tall, thin lady, girl, college student, freshman year, long black braid down the back of her head. And my friends said, no, Jerry, that's not good for you, but we know somebody. So the person was me, and about 3 or 4 of my friends came to dinner. They arranged Jerry and myself to meet, and came to dinner, and they sat around the table. I think they were watching, okay, now what's going to happen? And so Jerry said, let's get out of here. He picked up a chocolate chip cookie, which I kept, and I was going through old scrapbooks a few years ago and found this chocolate chip cookie taped to the page. And so anyway, we left, and I don't know what we did. I don't remember anything after leaving except for the fact that we planned to go out that following Saturday night, which we did, just the 2 of us. Oh my God, now I'm remembering things. So I remember I was in the dorm, Jerry picked me up, and I must have had a black dress on. And Jerry, I came downstairs from the dorm, and Jerry looked at me and said, oh, that's a nice skirt you're wearing. And I said, it's not a skirt, it's a dress. And I think to this day I could wear a dress, and Jerry says, your skirt. So anyway, we went out, and we basically dated ever since and got married in 1965.
What about where you're from?
After graduation. So I grew up in St. Louis, University City, Missouri, where Washington U is. And I was an art major. And in college, when I went to University of Cincinnati as a freshman, I was in my head going to transfer back after freshman year and go to Washington U. I actually had a boyfriend, and I was going to transfer back to be with my boyfriend. But then after I met Jerry, that ended that transferring back and the boyfriend, etc. So my art major turned into my art career. And I took, when I was in high school, from freshman year till I graduated, I went to a watercolor class every Saturday morning with my best friend. And then this best friend and myself wound up at University of Cincinnati. And my art career became my watercolor career. And I'm still doing my watercolor career. So what else from my
That's
past?
awesome.
Nutley High School.
No, yeah, that's sweet. Yeah. What about your family makeup? You want to tell us about your family?
Okay.
Like before, obviously you have your family, but so your parents, your siblings, any of that type of stuff.
So I have a sister, and she's 5 years younger. So actually, the age difference between Bob and Jerry is the same age difference as my sister and I. And when Jerry first met my sister, they immediately became best friends. So that was really nice. My mother and father were both only children. My mother grew up, well, as a little girl, Minneapolis. And her father owned a jewelry store with some brothers. I think there were lots of kids in the family. And there were jewelry stores, Minneapolis, Kansas City, and I'm not sure where else. But anyway, my grandfather, my mother's father, then went to Kansas City, Missouri with my mother, her mother and father, and the jewelry store. He went to Kansas City to the jewelry store. And so that's my mother's. My father was in the millinery, his family millinery business. I remember the name, Bear, Sternberg and Cohn. And they had departments, millinery departments, different parts of the South and maybe Midwest in stores. And so as the career that my father was in, he went to New York, had an office there, bought millinery, and sent it back to the stores throughout the Midwest, etc. And I was close to my grandparents. I didn't know my grandfather on my mother's side because he died, I think, of stomach cancer, actually, when my mother was in college, maybe freshman year of college. I'm not sure. Well, when my mother was in college. So my mother went to Washington U. Oh, I can backtrack on this. She had a scholarship. Her dream was to go to Wellesley College. She had a 1-year scholarship to Wellesley, a 4-year scholarship to Washington U. She was leaving Kansas City, Missouri. And I guess money was tight, probably Depression era. And my mother wound up having to give up the Wellesley dream and took the 4-year scholarship to Washington U. So my father and mother are 10 years apart. So I guess when my mother, that's you. When he was in his 80s, he used to go to all the reunions, and he was always the oldest one there.
Mm-hmm.
And he adored that. He adored the reunions. So when he enlisted in the Army, he went to India.
Burma China Road.
Yeah. And was in the jungle.
He was a
cryptologist.
Codes.
He translated codes.
And this is your dad.
My dad.
Right after you've been born.
Right.
No. Okay.
He wanted to get away from his wife.
Every time I think about my mother being home with a newborn baby. Now, her mother, I don't know if they lived together or they lived very close to each other, but they were always, I guess, together. And then I do have photographs of my mom and her mother and myself. And then there are photographs of my other grandparents and us together while my father was in India. So I think they took a lot of pictures, and I don't know if they were sent to India or whatever. And that was, I don't think I really knew my father until he came home after World War II. And I was over 3 years old, I think, which was the first time we had a relationship.
Yeah. I had similar because my dad was a Navy chaplain. So he would go on these 6-month cruises. And I'm the 5th. And he was the Navy chaplain so I was being born when he was getting home. But I think he went on another one later. It's not quite the same amount of time, but still some of my siblings, he'd be gone for 6 months.
Right.
Because he was a Navy chaplain. And that was hard, I think, on my mother. So
of course.
Definitely understand that.
Yeah.
Where's your family hail from? Do you know? Mother or father's side?
Been in the United States for a long time. I had a great-great-grandfather from Baltimore, who he was too young to join, I guess, World War I. So he lied about his age and said he was 16. And the word was he carried the flag in the army, whatever.
I thought you had people going back to the Civil War.
Yeah, do you? Wow.
Oh, that wasn't World War I. That was the Civil War.
The Civil War.
Oh,
yes.
Wow.
That was, thank you. That was the Civil
History
War.
is my American history. I like the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, French and Indian War. It was her ancestor that was in the Civil War.
Civil War, and he lied.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did he fight in the Northern Army or the Southern?
It was Baltimore.
I think he was in the Northern.
Okay. How old was he? So you said he lied and said he was 16.
Right, so maybe he was 15.
15, 14,
Yeah.
They did that.
That's neat. And scary, I'm sure, for his parents.
Yeah. Now, there's so many brothers and sisters on both sides, except for my mother and father, both being only children. But our grandparents, my sister has done a lot of research on the internet, etc., and has come up with tons of information. It's in a drawer somewhere, my share of it, that she sends me. So I don't know where any of these relatives are. We did keep up with 2 cousins on my mother's side. They were like sisters to her. One from Dallas, Texas, and one from Memphis, Tennessee. But my generation, my sister and I, have not kept up with the cousins. I know one of my nieces, actually, Wendy, who lives in Washington, D.C., the Dallas group had a son, my niece's age, who got married and lived in the D.C. area. And they were good friends for a while. I haven't heard about the relationship since. So that family, I guess, kind of split apart. But then I became closer to Jerry's family because he has lots of cousins. How many? Like 7 or 8? And we meet like once or twice a year for dinner. And
this is on my mother's side of the family. There's a bunch of, they're actually my second cousins. They were my mother's first, but they're more contemporaries of mine. And
actually, one of the cousins has a father who was a doctor who actually delivered Jerry and Bob. Is that important?
he didn't deliver us.
No, he didn't deliver Bob?
No.
Oh.
He was just our doctor, family doctor. He used to scare the hell out of me. Yeah. He used to say, I'm going to give you a shot. Uncle Benny, right? We're very friendly with his daughter, and he has 2 daughters. And
That's sweet.
Then,
well, let's talk about your family. You're married at what time, and then you've been married for
Yes, we got married.
You got kids.
We graduated in June. Both our families came to graduation in Cincinnati, and then we got married August 8th of 1965. We graduated in 65 and got married August 8th.
So we've been married a long time.
And I
Congrats on that. That's sweet.
Before graduation in May or whatever, maybe when school was out, but before graduation, Jerry and I went to Jerry's house in Passaic, and I had some interviews to teach art in the high schools, and I was hired by Nutley High School. I taught a year at Nutley High School, and then I was pregnant, so that was my 1 year of teaching art. Then, well, I'll backtrack to we were, before graduation, we were in Passaic, and I was interviewed for teaching, and then went back for graduation, and both of our families were there for graduation. Then we got married, went on a honeymoon, Ocho Rios, Jamaica, and then immediately moved to West Orange, New Jersey, and lived in the apartments that are still standing, and they were just being built then. And I remember they didn't even have grass then. They were still finishing the buildings, and now these are long-standing apartments.
And then Tracy was born. She was the first.
When was that?
She was born January 25th. She's 54.
Yeah.
She's 54 now.
She was born in 67.
You got any other kids?
Yes.
Yes.
1970, we had triplets. May 8th, which ironically enough is Bob's birthday. So Bob got triplets.
Instead of a cake.
Triplets is better.
And
I don't know. Cake would have been less expensive.
so the triplets were 2 girls and a boy.
What's does Scott work with you?
Yes.
Or for you, or?
He was in school when I was working at Birch Lumber, and he came with me and my father, who he idolized and idolizes now, and he's in the family business now, and he is hopefully the generation that is succeeding me, because I'd like to cut back a little bit because I've been working a long time. But I still enjoy work. I mean, there's trials and tribulations, obviously, but there's ups and downs. There's always problems. But I think the more you stay active, the better your mind functions, and you don't get into trouble, and you don't have to stay home, which would be a disaster. Even though I have a lot of hobbies and everything. and interests.
So it's Birch Lumber. Is that because you talked about hotels and you talked about the liquor, but is Birch Lumber like the?
That's the umbrella. That has always been the springboard of how we got into motels, how we got into healthcare. Then I got into apartment investing with some people that I know, and into different business ventures. I got these through just by being in the business community, and that's how, and also by being on the board of a public company. There were some relationships that were developed there that led to different outlets and things to become involved in, and that helped. But Birch Lumber has always been that back chair there where everything stemmed from originally.
Let me pause for a second. I just have to pause this.
When I say something like, this is for the computer, he says I say fur, like F-U-R. This is for the computer. Do I still do that?
Well, she still has the accent.
Yeah, that's St. Louis.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's how you know I'm not from Brooklyn.
I know, yeah. Definitely.
Right?
That we could tell.
That's a give.
Yeah.
Good giveaway. Well, let's talk about, I think that if we could talk about, so you live in New Jersey, but we are not currently in New Jersey. We're staying in Bob's house.
Right.
It's far away. So maybe if you could talk about what it's like to have Bob far away, how it works with, because you all obviously care for him. You're not maybe the caretakers, but so how does this all work?
Look, I might not be the best brother, but I'm his only brother. So we'll put it that way. And as far as my son, Scott, is more attuned to helping Bob and keeping things on an even keel than I am. And he has done a yeoman's job, I think, over the years for doing this, which has taken a lot of pressure off of me. Fortunately, I've been able to handle the financial end, which, is not inconsequential, but you need more than just that to make things work. And between Scott, my girls are pretty good also, but Scott is on the forefront of all of this.
I want to do one thing, sorry.
Go ahead.
I've got a little bit of this light is peeking out now where it wasn't. I'm going to pull it back later. You're fine.
Did I move the chair too much? Was that it?
It's fine. It may have been that, but it's fine.
Okay.
So Scott has been doing a lot of...
Scott has been doing a lot of... If something has to be repaired or anything, usually one of the guys calls Scott or Scott's in touch with them. And Nancy also keeps in constant contact, be it every week, whenever she finds these articles that nobody likes to read. She sends them to him.
Cut up the opera section.
Cut up the opera section and what have you, anything she thinks he might be interested in. And, we're all concerned, with the situation and how it evolves. And as you say, you can't plan all that far in advance. You sort of have to take almost, I don't want to say one day at a time, but, things in stride because there are always pitfalls. And hopefully we can surmount them now and going forward. And that pretty much sums up that. But the distance, with the communications being what they are these days, it's not so bad. And I say up until the pandemic, Bob had been able to come to New Jersey a couple of times a year, both for his cultural background, for the opera, concerts, and what have you. Museums, and to see the family. And whatever family could get over to see him, they did. And friends also. He has friends that were from actually my childhood who lived next door. A fellow named David Weinberger and his wife, Judy, who were very concerned about Bob and always ask about him. And there have been a lot of others, cousins and what have you. And, on occasion we've been able to have whoever is available get together when Bob comes in, which unfortunately is not all that often, but and the way things have evolved this year, it's been a challenge. But, the distance doesn't seem to be that much of a hindrance because the lifestyle in Bloomington is a lot less hectic, I believe, than it is in the metropolitan area where you have New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and you have all the factions of New York, and the business and the pace is a lot more frantic. And Bloomington is a good spot. If I were a history teacher, I'd sort of like to be here and take it from there.
Well, I can pull from different things, I guess, as I'm thinking about what Jerry said. And if you want to go back to when Bob was a kid, Jerry was a kid, growing up in their neighborhood, Jerry and Bob had a best friend, David Weinberger. David is a year younger than Jerry, and David was always over, and the three of them were best buddies. David and Jerry, I don't know, they loved having Bob around, and they kidded Bob. Maybe that's where Bob's sense of humor came from, because if they teased Bob, Bob would have to do one better to get back at them. And Bob had this dog, Lulubelle, and I just remember stories about Jerry, David, Bob, and Lulubelle. And I just think of like a fun, laughter, whatever, growing up. And I think that was a good part of Bob's past, Jerry's past, happy memories, etc. And should I pick up on Jerry growing up and Bob in the house after Jerry's mother died?
Yeah, if you have anything to add to that, that'd be great.
Okay. So after Jerry's mother died, I think maybe a year and a half, I don't know if it was 2 years, Jerry's father married this lady, Charlotte. Charlotte was a stockbroker, and at the time, well, she had 2 kids, Barney and Irv, and they all moved in, lived in Jerry's house and Bob's house. And at the time, Charlotte saw that Bob was brilliant and was not in a school that was developing his brain, and she was determined to have his brain developed. So she went to Washington, D.C., and I don't know if she went to the Library of Congress or wherever she went to look up where you could find the very best school to give Bob the very best education. So she found this school in Devil's Lake, North Dakota. The lady, what was the name of the school, Bob?
Jamestown?
Jamestown, North Dakota?
I have a little brochure that Bob has someplace in his pile of stuff. When he graduated from that school, he went to that school, graduated from that school. The lady who started that school had I think I'm right, Bob, had no arms and no legs, but she was brilliant. And she decided there had to be other people around who needed developing. And so...
If I can cut in real quick, nowadays that doesn't make sense because there's things for every type of person. So you're saying like there's this time, American history, where there's not being cared for. Could you open that up a little bit?
Because I guess it was sometimes hard for people to understand Bob. They didn't see how intelligent he was. And he never had an opportunity to show how intelligent he was.
And I think people with disabilities were pigeonholed more than anything else. And they didn't, as you say, it's not like it is today.
This is in the 50s.
This goes back 50, 60 years ago, at least 50 years ago, over 50 years ago.
Oh, way over.
So he has cerebral palsy. Is
He was
being
born-
treated with kids who have other handicaps?
Right.
Correct.
He was born with cerebral palsy. Right. And so I remember reading in his biography all these weird things they tried to do to get him physically walking or whatever, and nothing worked. But nobody tried to give him a high school course or an elementary school course, whatever. I don't think he got the education that he was that any other kid would get. It was all physical, try and get him physically. And I remember in the biography reading how sometimes that was physically painful. It hurt because his muscles just wouldn't do what the doctors wanted his muscles to do. So Charlotte said, forget all that. Go with his brain. And so then when Bob graduated from high school, I think Jerry said he came to IU because of the physical, how they were prepared to handle Bob. But in my mind, Bob also picked, now this is my mind, picked this school because Bob's life back then was opera and music and art, because I think when Bob was little, opera was played in his house constantly and music constantly, and that's what he grew up with, and that was his love. And if you look around his house here and you go into every room, it's ceiling to floor, wall to wall, books on composers, opera, anything you wanted to know about music. And IU, now I could have it wrong, so don't quote me, but except for Juilliard in New York, I think IU is it the best music school in the United States or one of the best music schools in the United States? And in my mind, that's why Bob got here.
And then they did things like they built, you had mentioned this, they built things like ramps and stuff.
They tried to make it accessible for Bob. And he has the biggest CD collection in the world, I would bet.
Well, I think you should do a tour of Bob's house, ceiling to floor, every single book. Yes, CDs. And let's see, I was going to add something else to that. Bob, to this day, audits music classes, and from what I understand, I don't think I'm wrong, that if the music school, if one of the professors doesn't have his hands on a CD or a book that one of the students needs, they send them over to Bob because Bob has it. So,
I've heard something like that, at least in the past. There would be people who would come in because he does have such a large collection of that specific type of
And Bob had a very, I assume he still has, a very close relationship with the professors and with the music school. And Bob goes to all the opportunities music-wise that IU presents. He also goes to Chicago for all these, and he's been all over Europe, music-wise, going to different productions, and it's incredible how well Bob has, I don't think enough has been said about the people living in the house, the guys. They're like Bob's life, his best friends, his brothers. Bob worships them. They worship Bob. In fact, I think that's how you got here, because you've been one of the people who've become
influenced.
Yeah, a giant influence. So gigantic. Yeah. So these guys, they take Bob all over. They take him to wherever he wants to go.
They
If there's a wedding in different places, if there's a music opportunity in different places, they drive to New York at the drop of a hat. I can't imagine the planning that goes into it, and the planning that goes into living right here, 701 Southeast Side Drive. The people, who's on, who's off, who goes to the doctor, who's giving the medications, who's the boss, what time is it, where are they? They're there on top of everything. The guys are the most important thing in Bob's life. That if Bob lived near us, we couldn't do that. We're too old. We were always too old. We had distractions. And these guys are his blood. And what else?
I think that's it. That's pretty much sums it up.
Here's another
Keep talking.
thing.
I'm going to do something, but you keep talking. I just want to set something up, but you keep going.
We're too emotionally involved.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you had to tutor your kid,
right.
You're too emotionally involved.
Nobody can do homework with their own kids.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You need somebody from the outside. These kids don't. The kids that take care of Bob don't have the emotional attachment to see how hard it is emotionally. They're here to do good. And also, I think, on top of it being difficult, Bob makes it fun because Bob has his sense of humor. Oh my God, you could laugh 24 hours a day. Whatever comes out of Bob's mouth is hilarious. So, and I don't think, first of all, it's hard to understand Bob, so people don't understand the humor. These guys do, and they give it right back to him. They don't just smile, they give it right back. So it's like one-upmanship. Who could be funnier? Who could be more sarcastic? Bob or the guys? And it's a riot to hear. It's very funny to hear. I love listening to them.
Yeah. So, how many? So we call them Bobites here. I have no clue. Do you have any sense as to when that turned? Did
Bob,
you know when that happened? Bob made it.
Bob made it.
Bob made it.
Yeah.
I don't know when it's actually evolved, but
There are thousands of them.
There's
And Bob, how old were you when you had the party where they all came from all over the place?
60 or 50?
60?
60.
Yeah, I think that's right because that was right before I started.
Yeah,
I think it was like I think I might have even been in town, but I wasn't working here.
They came from all over the United States with tons of kids. All the Bobites had
a few hundred
kids.
people.
We should do it again, like next year. I think it'd be great.
And you could show your movie.
Exactly, yeah. Or have that be a part of it.
Yeah.
Just finish it up at the end.
Yeah. That would be incredible.
So there's been all these, so, I mean, he's got like these, when we talk about it here, you know, because I've interviewed multiple Bobites, and I know a lot of them, I've been around for 12 years probably when I started. Bob doesn't live with these 40-year-old professional trained nurses. He lives with
people,
annoying 20-year-old kids right out of high school who some of them don't know how to do their own laundry. And one of the things that we talk so much about is how amazing it is that Bob is joyfully able to put up with these people, because these people are not
professional.
Always professionals, or the most enjoyable. And I think that's one of the things that we everybody recognizes about Bob around here is it's like,
I think that's the thrill of his life, to see these kids. And
Guys.
Bob, do you laugh at the kids or with the kids?
Both. Both.
So, well, I heard, Bob, one of your sayings was moron, whatever.
he calls people jackasses.
Yeah.
It's one of his favorites. But it's a term of endearment, and I think that's one of the things. I think it's interesting that Bob's sense of humor is something that all these young guys get. And it's almost like he's this older man, but he has a sense of humor. That still is that young man's sense of humor, which is pretty sweet. And he's able to take as much as he gets.
Well, I know where he got that sense of humor from.
Yeah.
His father, oh my God. So it was totally passed down because their father had a fabulous sense of humor. He was very, very, very funny. In fact, I think Bob got everything. Jerry got the serious side. Bob got the fun side. And Jerry's father was fun. He was hilarious. He was young at heart. And I think that's where it came from.
When did your father pass?
2012. April 2012.
How old was he?
98. He was with it till the night before he died.
Yeah, he was brilliant.
Yeah.
He was an incredible businessman. Incredible.
And he married Joyce.
Yeah, when did he and Joyce get married?
Over 20.
Do you remember?
They were married for what, over 20 years?
Way back. They had a Howard Johnson's in Florida, and he had to be down there. So because he had to be down there, he had a partner in this Howard Johnson's, and the partner in the Howard Johnson's, they bought this house together in Delray, Florida. So the partner got out of the house. He didn't want it after a number of years, but Jerry's father kept it in a community in Florida, Delray, called the Hamlet. And Jerry's father was a bike rider. So in October, he went down to the house and was riding his bike, and there were two ladies walking, and they said...
Playing golf, weren't they? Hitting golf balls?
No. They said, "Oh, hi, how are you? How was your summer?" Jerry's father said, "Oh, my summer was great. My wife left me, and business stinks." So one of the ladies said, "Well, if you're very serious, I'm free for dinner tonight."
That was Joyce.
That was Joyce. Jerry's father, they lived a few doors apart from each other. Jerry's father, they shared a man who took care of the houses when they were gone. And so Jerry's father got hold of him and said, "This lady, is she married? Is she divorced? What's her position?" And the guy said, "Oh, she's single." So Jerry's father called her and said, "Okay, we'll go out to dinner tonight." And they wound up getting married.
Well, I think the other thing that I'd like to talk about, if you all don't have other things, we can talk about anything else, but if you kind of had, and I'm going to restart. So if you had somebody meet you on the street and you wanted to tell them about Bob, so it's like just kind of from a blank slate. You know, you could have 30 seconds to do it, or you could have 5 minutes to do it, whatever, but if you had to describe Bob to some total stranger, how would you describe Bob?
I would say Bob is one of the strongest people I know. He's brilliant. If you put both of our heads together, he's much smarter than both of our heads together. His sense of humor is beyond amazing. And he physically is not able to do things for himself. I remember when he was younger, I think he typed his biography
Well, he
with the
dictated it.
little finger.
No, he dictated it.
Oh, he dictated it?
To the-
Well, at one point he was typing with a little finger of his left hand. And he typed whatever he typed. And then I guess after a while, he couldn't use that muscle anymore. It wore out or gave in or whatever. And so he is able to do with his life what most people couldn't have done with their life.
The situation.
Yeah.
He's been an optimist. You know, you have to describe it. You know, he enjoys people. He enjoys what he does, who he's with at all times, and basically that's it. With the tremendous amount of limitations. And
I have a sentence that describes Bob perfectly, and I can't pull it from my head,
Do you have it written down?
but it's on a piece of paper.
We'll go read it and you can come back and you can say it.
Bob is living proof that what you can accomplish when you think when you think about what Bob has accomplished, when you look at what he was able to do because he looked at what he can do. He didn't look at what he couldn't do.
Yeah.
So, talking about your glass being half full or half empty, he's proven that if you focus on what you know you're capable of doing, rather than thinking of all the things that you couldn't do.
Is Bob a sob story?
No way. No way, no way, no way. You know, if I tell friends that Jerry has a brother who has cerebral palsy, he's in a wheelchair, he needs people to do everything, they're shocked, and I go, wait a second, he's been all over Europe, going to every city that he's wanted to go to. He comes to New York for all the operas that he wants to see. He goes to Chicago for all the operas and music that he wants. He goes on the internet to get all the books and music and CDs that he wants. Whatever he wants, either he can accomplish it or he gets the guys to get it for him. So he knows what he wants and he doesn't hold back. So most of my friends have not accomplished or had the opportunity to accomplish what Bob has done with his life.
Yeah, I think I would say the same for a lot of people I know.
Yeah.
The things that Bob has done he's done a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And another thing is, most of my friends live in the present, and whatever they're doing now, let's say they're playing golf, let's say they go to workout classes, those are their friends. They lost all their friends from the past. Bob, except for death, has not lost anybody. He knows where each one of these people are. And I think he communicates with people from the past.
You mentioned Bob being optimistic. Why do you think he's so optimistic?
I think I would guess basically it was his upbringing and the influence that the different people in his life have had on him. You know, be it family, friends, relatives. You know, we have...
I can say exactly. Should I say? Jerry gets mad when I interrupt.
That's all right.
Okay. it goes back to Jerry's father. He didn't get to go to college, and he wanted to be an architect. So he rose above that and became a brilliant businessman. And then he had Jerry, and then he had Bob. And Bob was born with cerebral palsy. Jerry's father rose above that, did everything he could at the time to do whatever was available for Bob. And then a few years later, or more than a few years later, when Bob was 11, Jerry's mother died. Jerry's father rose above that, married Charlotte because he knew that he could not develop his family the way he wanted to just by himself. He needed somebody to help him. And Charlotte opened up the world to Bob with finding the high school. So Jerry's father, if anybody else had one of these bad situations, if anybody else wouldn't be able to be an architect because they couldn't afford to go to college, they would have given up life. Then if they had a child with cerebral palsy, they wouldn't have known what to do, they would have given up. If anybody else had their wife pass away with 2 kids and one in a wheelchair, they would have given up. Jerry's father didn't. For every blow that he got, he rose to the occasion and became stronger and better, more dynamic, capable, and fabulous in every way. Business, friendship, family. Oh, we didn't mention how our kids worshipped him. Every time I meet these kids, I go to myself, oh my God, they're going to be the best husbands in the world. Oh my God.
Get some more water.
Yeah.
And Jerry is the best husband in the whole world because he cooks, he cleans, he makes the beds, he's fabulous with the kids. I was the mean one, he was the nice one. And when we were first married, Jerry would come home from work, and I was in the kitchen because I thought the wives were supposed to make dinner and the husbands were supposed to come home from work and whatever. Jerry would walk through the kitchen door and go like this with his elbow and move me away from the stove. And I would say, Jerry, I'm cooking. Well, I'm gonna finish. And he would literally like push me away and take over. So after a while, I said to him, you know what, Jerry? It looks like you want to do this so badly. I'm going to go read magazines, you cook. You make dinner.
She's a horrible
And
cook.
ever since then, he's made dinner. And it is, one day you'll find out, you're going to clean, you're going to cook, you're going to be the very best husband around. Well, Scott loves getting together with Bob and the guys. So when Bob's in town, Scott makes it a point. He just wants to be with Bob one-on-one with the guys. He doesn't want a whole mess of family around. It's his time to have a one-on-one with Bob and be with him. Scott is and was above and beyond amazing. Scott is totally devoted to Bob and the guys.
Because your car got
You're a flat tire.
And Bob is sitting off screen, loving every moment of it. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Oh, you know what? I'm gonna take a picture.
Yeah, and I'm going to take a picture from this side too.
Okay, don't move. Just 3 of you guys stay there.
We'll stay here and then you stay there.
Mind your way.
Yeah.
Bob, I think the camera makes you look better than in real life.
No. Cameras are liars, you know, historically.